Okay.
All right. Where's the little
I
fence?
think we're waiting on the. This is the tomorrow stuff right there. Do you want to do that? Thank you so much. You get to take on this side too. Yeah,
Sure. What else? This is that's
I
not
need
it.
to think about it. Something like that. They're gonna be saying all
$1 million,
kinds of things.
$1 million
I'll be
bond.
able to clarify. What do you do with that?
And honestly, I have no idea
It
why
looks
everybody
stupid.
is hearsay.
Looks ridiculous.
Well, the hot recording.
Hello.
Which is
They're not
fine.
going anywhere.
They're violating. I really?
Cross-examiner.
Yeah. Yeah. She didn't say anything bad, to my knowledge, but they're pinning
Well,
off.
you never know, though.
No, and here's what the problem is. They are trying to pin
I don't think
that
that
she was a
I do.
gatekeeper and that she was like in charge.
So the bonds would have so.
I have, yeah.
Well, and then when she's rearrested, there was gigantic bond.
Really?
So they gotta be.
Probably a little. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Yeah, it just.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and counsel. The state may call its first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Detective Amber Campbell to the stand.
Detective, please come forward right up here to be sworn.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Morning, Detective.
Good morning.
Can you introduce yourself for the record?
Sure. My name is Amber Campbell. My last name is Campbell. My badge number is 7828, and I'm a vice detective with the City of Phoenix Police Department.
How long have you been a police officer?
I've been a police officer for almost 13 years. It's been, in March it will be 13 years.
Can you give the jury a brief outline of your process in becoming initially a police officer, the training you received, and sort of the arc of your career at the police department?
Sure. I hope you guys can hear me okay. If not, please let me know.
Anyone can't hear her, raise your hand. Okay, thank you.
I began the police academy in December of 2002, and as part of our academy training, we're provided with basic understanding of all sorts of things, including criminal law, traffic law, search and seizure, rules of evidence, constitutional law. We learn about patrol procedures, crime scene investigation, search warrants, everything from defensive tactics, firearms. As you can imagine, somebody like myself who comes from no police background, coming from corporate America, as did so many other people in the police academy, you learn everything from the ground up. I don't know if there's specific things that you want me to cover with regard to that, but we learned the basics of Title 13, Title 28 of the Arizona Revised Statutes.
And just so that you're in Title 13 and Title 28, those are essentially, Title 13 is the criminal laws in the state of Arizona, correct?
That's correct. And Title 28 is the traffic law. So certain laws that are used, most common laws that we investigate or crimes that we investigate are highlighted during the academy, and you actually walk through each of those different statutes and go over the elements of the offense and that kind of thing, and have detectives that investigate those crimes come in and talk to you about evidence collection and so forth.
Detective, you mentioned you have a background in corporate America. Just briefly tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I went to school at Arizona State University, and graduated. And before graduation, I started working for Charles Schwab. I worked in human resources on the institutional side and was responsible for staffing, benefits plans, that kind of thing. And then moved over and worked for CSK Auto, which is the Checker, Shucks, and Cragen Auto Parts Company, also in human resources. And so I worked 4 years in human resources just before becoming a police officer.
So when you were in high school, college, your thought wasn't, I'm going to be a cop, that's my life's work? Transition into that?
No, I periodically thought about that. I have family that's law enforcement, but as many parents do, they're very influential on their children and their chosen line of work, as were mine, and decided not to pursue that until 4 years after being in corporate America and deciding that it was time for me to do something that make a change.
After completing the police academy, you were a patrol officer initially?
Yes, after completing the police academy, everybody becomes a patrol officer out on the streets. I worked in the Squaw Peak precinct that's now referred to as the Mountain View precinct on the east side of town. And then I moved over and became a patrol officer in Maryville precinct, which is on the in West Phoenix.
How long were you a patrol officer?
I did patrol for about 3 years before taking on a position as a community action officer. And a community action officer is somebody that fields complaints, essentially, from the community, works to set up block watches, Phoenix neighborhood patrols, and works closely with the city manager's office, the mayor's office, the city council office for any kind of complaints that are coming in, and leading community meetings to determine complaints and address those concerns with citizens.
When you initially became a police officer, did you have in your mind that you wanted to be a detective, a certain type of detective, or did that sort of happen over time?
You know, I knew that I wanted to be a detective, but I wasn't sure exactly which line I would go. Quite honestly, I fell into a position with the Vice Enforcement Unit in that I became, as a community action officer, I started investigating liquor applications. When somebody is attempting to get a liquor license, they have a requirement to fill out a liquor license, and then we in the city of Phoenix, the police department, investigate their ability to hold a license, their capability, their qualifications to do so. And so I started investigating liquor applications and applicants, and then took a liquor enforcement detective position in our Vice Enforcement Unit. The way the Phoenix Vice Enforcement Unit was structured back in 2009 when I took that position was we had a lieutenant who oversaw both the Vice Enforcement Unit and the Liquor Enforcement Unit. And as a liquor enforcement detective, I was investigating illegal enterprises that had liquor licenses, and also working undercover to determine if individuals were complying with the Title IV liquor laws, meaning they're not over-serving patrons, they're not allowing underage individuals into their establishments, that kind of thing. So I was already working undercover, and based on the fact that the two squads were sister squads, as we call it, we report to the same lieutenant, and we literally sit 20 feet or so from each other. When the decision was made to disband the liquor enforcement squad, all of the liquor enforcement detectives were absorbed into the Vice Enforcement Unit, and we began investigating vice cases, traditional vice cases.
You mentioned when you were at least initially on the liquor enforcement squad, you did some undercover work. Can you talk a little bit about your first experiences working undercover and kind of how that prepared you for working undercover capacity as a prosecutor?
Sure. What we had responsibility for, as I mentioned, was going into liquor establishments and removing the officer presence that one would have as a patrol officer, a position of authority, and being in that location like you would on a Friday, Saturday night, observing for activity without coming across like a patrol officer would. And so I had experience observing interactions of all the individuals, the inner workings, who appeared to be reporting to who was in charge, who was collecting money, that kind of thing, and feeling comfortable in my own skin as an undercover, assuming an identity of somebody I was not. Oftentimes during the course of those investigations, we were portraying ourselves as people we were not, as women out on a bachelorette party, or out for a night of drinks, that kind of thing. And that experience helps in my transition over to a vice enforcement detective, in that you develop a sense of confidence in your ability to work undercover, and that translated directly to my ability to work in a capacity as a prostitute.
Now, when you said you sort of fell into the liquor enforcement squad, is that easy, just patrol officer one day, the next day you're a detective, or is there some training, some things that you learn as you transition to being an investigator?
Definitely, there's a transition. I say I fell into the role in vice enforcement because we were absorbed. I didn't fall into the position of a liquor enforcement detective. When you go from a patrol officer to a detective, there's definitely a transition that happens. And one of those requirements is that you attend an investigator training. And that's something that I did in 2008. And during that, it's the detective training program, basically, where you learn to write search warrants, you learn how to interview victims, you learn how to collect evidence, you learn how to do crime scene diagrams, you learn how to just completely own and process a case, a crime scene. And so I had to go through that certification, and I did that in January of 2008. That's a requirement before taking on a detective position. And for me also, I was very involved with vice enforcement as a patrol officer. There aren't a huge number of undercover females that want to work in a capacity of a street-level prostitute, or that have the skills, or frankly, it's desire to do that type of work. And so as a patrol officer, I spent time working with the vice enforcement unit as an undercover decoy, as we call it, working customer apprehension programs, where I'm literally out on the street walking as a prostitute and soliciting, having men solicit me for sexual acts. So I had that experience, worked those customer apprehension programs on many occasions. And then the precinct that I was working in, the Maryvale precinct, had a high volume of street-level prostitution from 27th Avenue to about 51st Avenue. And so when I became a community action officer, obviously when prostitution is something that's very prevalent in your neighborhood, people see it. When you see it, you want to report it, or you have concerns about it. And so we had a high number of individuals calling the police department, reporting prostitution activity in their neighborhood because it was so visible. So as a community action officer, I was involved with the prostitution aspect, in that I brought together a bunch of business owners, community members, hotel managers, that kind of thing, and I worked with the businesses to create the McDowell Quarter Community Alliance, which is a group that we met on a monthly basis. We talked about indicators of prostitution, how to report it, how to improve the lighting in their businesses, how to improve the cut down trees or trim trees up so that there's not hiding places. So it's called CEPTED. It's community policing through environmental design, basically changing the way their business looks so as not to attract that activity or attention. So I had involvement with the vice unit and with prostitution, both as a patrol officer working as a decoy out on the street, and then again as a community action officer working with the businesses, the concerned citizens, working with the hotel managers on how to recognize the signs of trafficking and prostitution, how to change their acceptance for payment from individuals to ensure that they're not accepting cash. We worked on again, improving their lighting, putting cameras in, that kind of thing, so that they recognized the prostitution was occurring in their hotels, and I assisted them with trying to eliminate or eradicate that activity from their hotels. So I had all of that background and experience prior to taking on the liquor enforcement detective position, which helped, obviously, in my transition as a vice detective.
So once then you said that your liquor squad is absorbed by the vice squad that focused more on prostitution. Did you receive some initial or some additional trainings on undercover work, things of that nature that prepared you to do more complex investigations?
Yes, I did. I attended 2 undercover schools. Both of them were between 3 to 5 days long. One of them focused on undercover work. Another one was specifically focused for female undercovers working prostitution-related cases. And in those undercover trainings, we learned a tremendous amount about covert operations, about how to use informants, about how to conduct yourself as an undercover, the equipment that's available to us to work undercover, the safety considerations. So those 2 undercover, we call them undercover schools, were definitely some training that I went to.
Now, fair to say that you mentioned when you were a community action officer, particularly in the McDowell area, kind of the focus was on street level prostitution. And when you see street level prostitution, you actually seeing women walking the streets working as prostitutes.
That's correct.
In doing that and then joining the vice squad, did you learn about how there are different aspects of prostitution, street level on one side, and then there's other types of ways prostitution occurs in the city?
Absolutely. In fact, I saw a lot of that changing. The transition was happening around that time between street-level prostitution, which is still prevalent today, but not as visible as it was back in 2004, 2005, or even 6. I saw the transition, and I continue to see the transition to more internet-based prostitution activity, the utilization of online advertisements. And instead of it being so visible so that community members were complaining to the police department and you had patrol officers monitoring for street-level prostitution, it became more underground. It became a situation where people were utilizing, hotel rooms, apartments, brothel-style locations. So that transition was happening while I was a community action officer, and then as a full-time vice detective, we saw a lot less, dramatically reduced street-level prostitution, and our cases became more internet-based investigations.
Now, you briefly touched on it. You talked about learning how to work undercover as a prostitute. Can you go into a little more detail about what a vice detective does other than make themselves look like a prostitute and make arrests? What else do you do on a day-to-day basis as far as being a detective?
So the vice detectives within the Phoenix Police Department have a responsibility for carrying caseloads in addition to working in an undercover capacity, which is different than other agencies, some other agencies. We have responsibility for any cases that come in from patrol officers. So if patrol officers contact somebody out on the street and they effect an arrest, either of a John or a buyer or a prostitute, those cases come to us. So we have case management responsibility for those cases, and then we also have responsibility for undercover work. But our duties as vice enforcement detectives include answering all complaints, and the complaints come in from a variety of groups. They come in from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, people that are advertised online that they suspect to be juveniles. They come in from Polaris, which is a national tip line for people to report human trafficking incidents. They come in from the mayor's office, city manager's office, from our own Phoenix Police website, come in from Silent Witness. And the complaints that I'm referring to, they run the gamut. Could be somebody that's suspected of suspecting a neighbor or something of prostitution. Could be somebody that sees an ad that they think might be a juvenile. It could be an illegal massage parlor or something they suspect to be a brothel. We get complaints from all those different groups. Among others, we have a vice enforcement tip line, and we get complaints into us from other agencies. So we investigate all those complaints. It could be escort escort investigations, either online. It could be brothels, residential brothels. It could be massage parlors. We have responsibility for all the sexually oriented businesses, which include topless bars and full nude cabarets. We have responsibility for investigating any complaints or issues in arcades, adult arcades. And we also still have responsibility for liquor investigations and gambling investigations in internet cafes, poker rooms, that kind of thing. So our responsibilities are kind of run the gamut, not just prostitution. And certainly with all those things that I covered in strip clubs and brothels and gambling, we work in an undercover capacity throughout all of those.
The complaint comes in, come from a myriad of sources. It's your responsibility and duty to follow up on whatever that complaint and make a determination on whether or not there's a crime.
That's correct. We investigate the complaints regardless of the source. We investigate the complaints that come into us to determine if there is any legitimacy to the complaint and to determine how we are going to proceed from there. And each complaint is assigned to a case agent. We call ourselves case agents. Basically, the case agent is somebody who's been assigned that complaint. So as a case agent, you have ultimate responsibility for that complaint from the time you receive it to the time it's closed. And it's either closed after a case is adjudicated, or after you've determined that it's unfounded, or the business closes. It all depends. But as a case agent, you have ultimate responsibility for everything involved in that case, meaning you don't have supervisory responsibilities and oversight of the people working on the case. I'm not a supervisor, I'm not a boss, I don't have responsibility for anybody. I am a detective who's responsible for me and my cases as a case agent. And so I have responsibility to ensure that the investigation moves along and that the reports are completed, subpoenas are done, search warrants are done. Whatever is necessary in that particular case, I have ultimate responsibility and ownership of that case, and that's what a case agent means.
And as you sit here, you are in fact a case agent in this particular investigation, is that right?
I am. There were actually 2 case agents in this investigation, which is common on illegal enterprise type cases. It's common when it's a business. Based on the amount of individuals that we may contact, it's common for 2 case agents to be assigned. So myself, and I believe you guys will hear from Detective Amanda Herman, she and I worked together as co-case agents on this particular complaint.
So if some paperwork's not missing or something, we complain.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, you talked about how there was a transition from 2005, 06, around 2010, sort of much less presence of streetwalkers and more of the prostitution originating from online sources. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, in terms of the investigations that were done maybe in the mid-2000s, a lot of that was, let's say, focused on arresting the streetwalkers who were prostituting themselves out on McDowell or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, the focus was, as a vice detective back then, because street level prostitution was so prevalent, the vice unit would investigate, would spend a tremendous amount of time actually out on the street picking up girls, surveilling activity, and less time was spent on child prostitution investigations, and because it wasn't something that vice detectives were necessarily educated about. They'd come across girls who were involved in child prostitution, get them the resources that they needed, but it wasn't something that was commonplace, and it was certainly not something that detectives spent a huge amount of time with. It was mostly street-level prostitution, and that evolved after a couple of cases where juvenile individuals were found in horrific situations as victims.
As part of that evolution, included more of a focus on what you refer to as pimps, or the people who are actually running prostitution enterprises.
Absolutely. The focus became less about the girls, the prostituted individuals that were out there on the street, prostitutes as people refer to them as, and more about those individuals placing those people into that position, meaning pimps, traffickers. And so we spent, I keep referring to myself, I was not on the vice enforcement unit, just to make that clear back then, but they spent a lot more time with this evolution. Instead of contacting a girl out on the street and saying, okay, here's your ticket, you're on your way, or off to jail you go. Instead, it became about what led you to get in this position. Do you have a home life? Do you need resources? And when you start opening that dialogue with individuals, they started to actually uncover the fact that these girls that were out there on the street, and I keep referring to it as girls because that is more prevalent, but there are male individuals that are involved in the life as well. But when we start talking to these individuals out on the street, they were realizing that they were trafficked or that there were pimps involved, and then it became more about these girls are victims, let's see them as victims, and the focus became going after the traffickers or the pimps.
We've talked about it a little bit, but can you sort of break it down to the basic level? How is prostitution in your training experience? How does prostitution work generally?
Prostitution that's a very loaded question or open-ended question. So I can tell you that prostitution either involves somebody that's trafficked, meaning that they are induced into the life of prostitution by either deceit, force, or coercion, or they are victims of pandering, which is, when they are compelled or encouraged or induced to live the life or to complete acts of prostitution. Or there's individuals that people would say choose the life of prostitution. So there's kind of different degrees of, I don't know if degrees is the right word, but there's different ways that individuals end up in the life of prostitution. And there's a commonality about all of those, whether somebody chooses the life, whether they're forced by physical force or fraud or coercion into the life, or whether or not they are compelled, induced, or encouraged into the life. And the commonality amongst all of them is that these individuals generally lack self-esteem. Many of them are physically, sexually, or mentally abused at some point. Many of them have substance abuse problems with either alcohol or drugs. Some of them have limited education and have, many cases have children and feel like they don't have a means of making a living aside from this. Some of them, unfortunately, had no desire, most of them. In fact, I don't know a single one that had a desire as a small child to enter into the life of prostitution. I personally have not experienced that. But many of them encounter somebody along the way when they're down on their luck, or they've run away from a group home who sells them a dream of a better life, promises them wonderful trips out to restaurants, nice clothes, nice purses, nice shoes, manipulates them. They are then tricked or encouraged to live a life that they never saw for themselves, but that they find themselves in due to their circumstances. And many of these individuals that they contact are, the pimps are what I'm talking about. Most of the pimps are males, however, we have several female pimps as well. Many of these pimps come across as a boyfriend. They start paying compliments to the women and telling them how beautiful they are, how smart they are. They're going to go far with themselves. They can be a model. They can be an actress in a movie and develop a relationship, a friendship. From there, it progresses to a romantic relationship. And at some point, the switch is flipped, and now these women feel like they owe their traffickers or their pimps something in return for all the wonderful, generous things that he's provided for her. And that's when prostitution often occurs. Every case is very different. Every victim that we encounter is very different about how she entered into the life of prostitution, but there's generally a commonality across the board that they were in either low self-esteem, financially strapped, had some sort of physical or emotional or sexual abuse in their background, and that led them into the life of prostitution.
How does the promise of safety how does the promise of safety from the person called a pimp or the person who is trying to encourage a female to prostitute herself, how does promise of safety figure into the manipulation?
Safety is of utmost importance to many of these individuals, most of these individuals. Actually, I would say all of the individuals, in that many of them don't have a family support system. They don't have they don't have moms and dads and sisters that they can turn to. They don't have a home that they can go to when they're down on their luck to get back on their feet. So the security and the safety of somebody else, like a pimp, who can provide that security for them is very important. And then safety, meaning protection, when they actually get into the life of prostitution is paramount, because when you're in the life of prostitution, there's always other pimps and traffickers that are trying to recruit you to work for them. And their pimps are in the game of constantly recruiting. They want a larger stable, as they call it. And a stable is a family. Another word they use, stable, family. It is basically the pimp and his or her prostitutes. And so it could be one, it could be five. They're constantly on the hunt for more girls, because the more girls they have, more money they're making. Prostitution, is the second fastest growing illegal enterprise in the United States, only next to drug trafficking. And the reason for that is because there's so much money. You can sell that same girl over and over and over again. And so the more girls that he has in his stable, he or she has in their stable, the more profitable it is for them. And so he has a need to provide safety and security to protect her from other pimps, but also the safety and security of actually a residence, a place for her to stay, live, food, shelter, that kind of thing.
Now, you mentioned that word family. That's sort of what you've seen in your experience as far as how an individual may has a number of females who are prostituting themselves for him or her. They'll refer to the group as a family, or create that sense of belonging where some of these didn't previously have a true family to turn back to.
Absolutely. That's one of the most common threads that we see among victims. Many of these individuals that we contact, and again, the majority are females, many of them did not have a family. They did not have that family support network. And pimps are very manipulative, and they recognize, they ask a lot of questions early on to determine what's missing from that individual. What is she lacking? And oftentimes that family, that support network is missing. And the other women in the group become family. They look at each other. They call, when we encounter them, they say, oh, that's my sister. It's very commonplace to refer to each other as family. And for many of these women, that's it. That's all their family. They come from group homes. They come from, the backgrounds are very varied. I mean, prostitution affects all ages, all demographics, all races, that kind of thing. But the commonality is definitely that there's some lack of family support network.
Now, the term several times. In your experience, kind of think about the term pimp. Does it often, there are variations within it. Call everyone who is helping individuals get into prostitution or making some amount of money, would you call them all pimps, or is there some variation within that?
Well, pimps, it's a very generic term, and I keep throwing it out there because we use that word in talking about what we refer to as suspects in cases, or we refer to as when we encounter somebody, just our law enforcement beliefs, there's a victim and a suspect, and so a pimp is a suspect. But pimps look different, very, very different. We see pimps that we refer to them as pimps, but they're owners of a massage parlor. We see pimps that are, the girl on first contact identifies as her boyfriend. He's somebody that she might, for 2 or 3 contacts, deem as her boyfriend. He's not somebody that beats her, tortures her, is abusive with her. She refers to him as her boyfriend. So pimps come in all different, they're male, they're female, all different walks of life. But pimps, in our mind, is kind of a generic term referring to the suspect in that particular situation, meaning that he was victimizing or she was victimizing this person that we deem to be person that's engaging in acts of prostitution.
You mentioned some experience in the massage parlors. Can you talk about your specific experience in a little more detail and how you have seen massage parlors used as a vehicle for prostitution?
Absolutely. In many cases, massage parlors are used as they're illegal enterprises and houses of prostitution. Their parlors are, in the business of providing massages, but oftentimes we see massage parlors that are specifically, I can't say that they're designed for males, but they cater to happy endings of males, basically. And by that I mean that the individuals inside, it's a front for a business. It appears on the exterior like it's a legitimate business, but once inside obtaining a massage, then there's a discussion about illegal sex acts on top of the regular massage, and those sex acts are for additional monies. And so many massage parlors are in fact fronts for prostitution.
Can you give a specific example of where you may have worked undercover in a focus of the investigation of a massage parlor and kind of what you saw?
Sure. Something that comes to mind, one particular massage parlor that I worked in, that I worked in an undercover capacity, I'll say that, it's a location in the city of Phoenix. And in this particular investigation, we know that by getting on the inside and interacting with the employees of the establishment, you gain a lot more understanding about how they operate and who's in charge, what's the fee structure look like, the overall operation of that enterprise. And so in this particular case, I went into the massage parlor in an undercover capacity and gained employment there, and actually worked within the massage parlor, seeing customers. The customers were all also undercover police officers. So there was, on the outside to the individual who was running the house of prostitution, it appeared to her as though I was a legitimate massage therapist with a license. And through that investigation, I was able to learn kind of the inner workings of the establishment, how much money I was to charge, how the money went back to her, what happened to the used condoms, how we interacted with Johns, or how I was supposed to interact with Johns. And by John, I'm using that term that's maybe common language to you, but I'm referring to a buyer that was coming into the business. So I interacted with legitimate patrons of that business. I scheduled them for later so that I didn't actually have to see them and hang out with them. But I had a good understanding at that point of how the enterprise worked. And it was, in that particular case, it was very valuable to our case, because we could then establish that what was going on inside the location was in fact prostitution, and that the earnings from those acts of prostitution that she believed that I was engaging those proceeds were going directly back to her to establish that illegal enterprise case.
Within that example, you talked some information about what the person who's running the enterprise. You talked a little bit more detail about, generally speaking, investigations in the enterprise, massage parlors, other houses of prostitution, what the person who is running that, what sort of things do they promise, or what do they do on behalf of the women working for them?
So in an illegal enterprise case, or a complaint of a business that we believe might be a house of prostitution, or the complaint at least indicates that it's a house of prostitution, one of the most important things for a vice enforcement detective is to establish who's in control of that business, who's directing the efforts of the individuals involved. So we spend quite a bit of time doing background research on the front end. So we are pulling calls for service, police calls for service, to figure out who's called in. If it was a burglary, who's reporting it, who's the responsible reporting party, any police reports, who's listed in those reports. We spend time going to the Corporation Commission and looking at the articles of incorporation for different businesses to determine who's the managing members, who are the partners, who's in control of that particular business. We'll do Google searches, internet research, to determine if we can find anything about kind of the underlying structure of that business and who's in control, who's in charge, who's doing the hiring. Those are all very important when you're working with enterprise cases, because ultimately you have to establish, in the end, if you determine it's a house of prostitution, you have to establish who's responsible for that crime. And so we spend, on these illegal enterprise cases, we spend a tremendous amount of time on the front end doing that research prior to going into the business to do the next step, which are undercover deals and undercover detectives. Many of our cases, in fact, most of our cases, it's undercover male detectives, being that it's females that are providing sexual services, sexual acts to males. Our male undercovers go into those establishments to ascertain Is there any acts of are there any acts of prostitution? They're not always. Are there acts of prostitution occurring? Yes, no. So they'll do a series of undercover deals in the locations. And then we also usually, as female undercover detectives, we usually will go into the business and attempt to gain employment, again, to establish what is going on there, who's hiring us, how does the money look. When a female undercover goes into a business, the individuals don't generally suspect that we're undercover officers and are usually very forthcoming with information about how the price split is going to work, how much we're supposed to charge for certain sex acts, how much money goes back to the business, who's, we can determine at that point who's posting advertisements, how the call screening process is going to look. So as a female undercover, we're able to gather a lot of information about how the organization works. The male detectives determine, in most cases, whether or not there are acts of prostitution occurring in that business. Together, after doing surveillance and other things, we can determine, how we're going to proceed with a particular case.
You mentioned that in your experience when you're looking at before this level of prostitution, there's a split after you were looking at organizations, enterprises, even individuals, learn that there's an exchange of sex for money. There's a split between female who does a sex act and the person who's in control, whoever's running the business. How is that split? How's that part of what you see in the prostitution?
So, in just about every illegal enterprise case, in fact, I can't think of a single one, it's commonplace for there to be a split of the money. It's commonplace for the house to get a certain amount or the location to get a certain amount and the prostitute, the person committing sex acts, to get the majority of that money, which differs dramatically from street level or escort cases. Street level prostitution and escort based online prostitution varies dramatically. If there's a pimp involved, generally he or she gets 100% of that money, and then in return pays for food, pays for the ads, pays for hair, nails to get done, that kind of thing. If there's no pimp involved, then obviously she gets the full amount of the money. But in illegal enterprise cases, across the board, there's a split, and generally the individual committing the sex acts keeps the majority of the money and a percentage of it, and it varies. Could be 25%, 30%, 50%, but some split of that money goes to the individual who's running the enterprise.
Now, you've given us a couple of terms that you use on a day-to-day basis in the prostitution world. John, you mentioned family. Is there a language that, in your experience, is connected with a general language connected with the world of prostitution?
Absolutely. There's a general language. It's like a subculture, basically. And excuse my language, but a person that's considered the most trusted or loyal individual in a group is referred to as a bottom bitch for pimps. Kind of the second in command. There's other girls within that family or that stable that consider themselves in-laws, wifeys, wife-in-laws, that kind of thing. They're part of that family. That terminology is generally utilized within the pimp culture when I'm talking about street-level prostitution. It's common terminology across pimps all over the United States. You know that the bottom bitch, oh, that's his bottom bitch, or that's her bottom bitch, you know. I know that that's going to be somebody that's going to be hard to take over. You also know that you know, we have terms, they have terms like reckless eyeballing when you're looking at other pimps and you're not allowed to. Terms like out of pocket, when a prostitute doesn't follow the orders of the pimp and is disrespectful. It's called being out of pocket. So there's various terminology that's very consistent across this culture. And regardless of whether you're in Arizona, you're in California, you're on the other side of the country and the East Coast, the terminology is fairly consistent. So you don't usually hear layman's words when you're dealing with this subculture.
Have you, in your experience, sometimes in looking at enterprises, some develop their own specific terminology or language talking about what they do?
Absolutely, in that they don't talk about, well, you need to go have sex with that guy and get $50. You know, that's what we say. That's what the common person refers to it as. That's not what individuals in the life of prostitution talk about. They are generally trying to disguise what they're doing. They want to ensure that law enforcement is not knocking at their door. So, for instance, in advertisements, you don't see them saying, like, Backpage.com is a common place for advertisements. Backpage, arrows, we have Provider Report, the Erotic Review. There's a whole number of them. But on these websites, you don't see people posting $100 for sex, $200 for blowjobs. It doesn't look like that. Instead, it looks like, and I'm just throwing out fees. This doesn't necessarily mean these are the absolute prices, but it may say $80 HH for half an hour. It may say donation $50 or 50 roses or 100 kisses. And they're not describing specific sex acts in those advertisements. It's a way to evade law enforcement. So the terminology is very, they're very discreet in the way that they post their advertisements. And then just the way that once an individual, like an undercover detective, calls one of those ads, the way they behave is very, they're very discreet. Like, for instance, on the phone, they may say, you know, our detectives might say, hey, can I come over and, you know, get sex from you or whatever? And they're quick to say, no, we don't talk about that on the phone, you know. And then the detective may say, well, how much is it for half an hour? And she'll say, well, it'll be $80. He agrees to come over for half an hour. There's been no mention of any kind of a sex act because that's not something that's generally discussed over the phone. And then when he gets close to the area, he's instructed to call back. She'll give him generally a cross street. And then when he gets to those cross streets, he calls back. She then will direct him either to the apartment complex, to a hotel, to a business, whatever it may be. And then when he gets in the parking lot, she may then say, call me back, and she'll get an apartment number. And it's a way to have pimps or traffickers kind of scan the area, determine if there's other cars coming in, does it look like they might be a cop. So a lot of what they do is very discreet. They're very discreet in their behaviors, and they do a lot of screening for law enforcement. Some of the other things that are done, you know, when the undercover gets to the room, they've already discussed it's going to be $80 for a half an hour. So when they get there, there's no more talk about the money. She'll generally say, put it on the table, put it on the counter. Sometimes they ask for the money and it's handed to them. And then there may be discussions of the sex act or what's about to occur. And sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's just a matter of doing it.
I want to take a brief step back. You mentioned a little bit about how sites like Backpage.com, Arrows, others are the avenue that people who control enterprises or pimps use to advertise services. I want to talk specifically about Backpage.com. First of all, Backpage.com is not just a here's some prostitutes willing to exchange sex. It's a website in which you can sell all sorts of legitimate services, correct?
Absolutely. But I will say Backpage.com in the Phoenix metro area is the #1 internet site for advertising your escort services. And by escort services, I mean they actually have an escort section, but it's the #1 place for women and men and transsexuals, doms, fetishes. It's the #1 place in the Phoenix metro area for an individual to go to advertise their services, illegal services.
Now, you mentioned escort. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience with escort?
Well, an escort is one thing. My experience of what an escort is very different. People refer to an escort as somebody that will accompany them to a restaurant, for $100, I'll be your date for the night, that kind of thing. My experience of what an escort is very different because there's nowhere to go as a prostitute to advertise your services as a prostitute. There's no website, prostitution.com, come see me. So the escort section of Backpage.com, along with the body rub section, along with the transsexual section, male escort section, that is where individuals in this line of work advertise their services. They advertise as if they are escorts, when in fact they are prostitutes. They're working as prostitutes.
In your experience, obviously, as an undercover detective and going to the escort section, do you have any experience of any legitimate escort, meaning someone who is going to take $100 to go to dinner or the movies, that exists within Backpage.com's escort section?
I can't say that it doesn't exist. All I can say is I've never seen it. I can't say that there aren't people out there that truly are escorting for, going out on a dinner date, that kind of thing. But in my experience, I have never seen an individual, we've never encountered an individual who's a legitimate escort. Many of the people that we do encounter in the city of Phoenix, we actually have an escort code, an ordinance. Many of the people that we encounter them, and we haven't gotten to that next step to determine whether or not they truly are working as prostitutes. We are conducting escort violation checks, to ensure that they have an escort ID card. So I can't say with 100% certainty that one doesn't exist. All I can say is anybody that we are attempting to get a prostitution deal with, they are either working as prostitutes or they are working, and we get an actual prostitution deal with them, or we encounter individuals where male undercovers go in and attempt to get prostitution deals, but they are so knowledgeable about the laws that they won't discuss the actual sex act. And being that we work in an undercover capacity and we can't actually carry out the sex act, we don't obtain prostitution deals with them, but they've got the condoms, they're starting to grope our male undercovers, so it's clear that that's what their intent was. So I have not seen a legitimate escort on Backpage or on any of those erotic websites, but again, that's not to say that they don't exist, that's just not my experience.
Now, in your experience in investigations, you had occasion to speak with referred to as Johns or males, typically males who are responding to the act on Backpage, is that right?
Yes, I've worked in an undercover capacity on multiple occasions, both in working as a child who is arranging to meet with a buyer or a John, and also as an adult and we encounter those individuals, being that I post my own escort ads and fielding calls from the individuals calling in. And I can tell you from the people calling in, they're not calling in to accompany me or to have me accompany them on some fancy dinner. They're very vulgar in a lot of respects. Many of them are discreet, but many of them are very, very specific about what sex act they want me to perform on them, what they want me to do that their spouses won't do for them at home, what their fantasies are, what their just what their every desire is, and they're willing to pay for that. So they're very descriptive. I've had many, many hundreds of conversations with customers calling in response to my own ads. And I have never once in all of those conversations ever had a conversation with somebody that wanted to take me out on a date or to a business meeting or some social function. They were calling my ad for a sex act.
The ads that you're talking about were ads that you had posted on the escort section, backpage.com, in undercover.
Correct.
Yeah, going into a little more detail about ads right on backpage.com in the escort section, you mentioned there is a kind of coded language. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Instead of $sign, it's roses or sweet tarts or kisses, things like that. But in your experience, that language refers to the money to be paid for sex. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
In your experience, have you seen language in ads which, instead of saying this is how much something costs, it will be referred to as a donation?
Oh, yes. If you go out to backpage.com right now, you'll see women who refer to the dollar amount that they're requesting as a donation. Again, a donation, an offering, hugs, kisses, roses. They don't come out and say this money for this sex act. They may just put the dollar amount with no terminology, but don't refer to it as anything more than that.
Your experience with the language included, like donation, like 200 kisses, that is means for avoiding law enforcement. You cannot say, hey, sex for money, right?
That's correct. And in fact, a lot of ads actually have some little blurb on them, little picture. The way Backpage is structured, there's photographs. You can attach as many photographs or even little snippets of videos. Sometimes there are pictures that are attached that'll say, and even sometimes in the text of the ad, it'll say, by contacting my ad, you are attesting to the fact that this is not an agreement for prostitution, or money is going to be for exchange of my time only. Whatever else happens is between, consenting adults, something to that effect. As a disclaimer, some of them will say, by contacting my ad, you're guaranteeing you're not law enforcement. It's a disclaimer that they put on their ads as a way of evading law enforcement, or what they believe to be a way to evade law enforcement.
Now, the ads that you described as sort of the open conversation between typically a man seeking sex with a woman who's going to provide sex for money. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I want to talk a little bit more about other ways that people in enterprise business working in selling prostitution, how they avoid law enforcement. And I think you touched on it a little bit, but specific ways that there are what's referred to as law enforcement screening. How are we able to, how is a prostitute able to sell sex for money and not get caught and arrested? So can you talk a little bit more about law enforcement screenings?
Sure. And it differs dramatically if we're talking about street-level prostitution versus kind of behind closed door prostitution, meaning like escort prostitution or enterprise prostitution. And most of our massage parlor or houses of prostitution cases, illegal enterprise cases, a law enforcement screening tool is, first and foremost, they want the individual to be naked. That's usually a prerequisite before they'll even start to discuss anything more. And the basis for that is that many people have the understanding that law enforcement officers are not allowed to get naked. And in many cities that is the case. Not the case in Phoenix as long as the officer or the detective is covered. His genitals are covered. But that is a screening tool that's used because the belief is that officers can't get naked. There's also one of the commonalities is that money is generally, some cases it is, some it's not, but money is often not handled. Money is placed, meaning place it on the table, place it on a dresser, place it on a nightstand. It's not directly handed to the individual. The discussion of that money oftentimes occurs on the phone prior to the individual getting there if it's an escort operation, so that when the detective, the undercover detective, gets to the location, there's no discussion of that money. That he knows that for a half an hour, for an hour, he's going to be paying a certain amount of money. He arrives to the location with that money, so there's no discussion about money. Or she tries to prevent a discussion about money when he gets there. He brings up the topic of money. No, just leave it on the counter or leave it on the table. Sometimes she'll take it. Every case is different. But then there's also all of the checks in place, not giving an address right off the get-go, making 2 or 3 calls before, he has to make 2 or 3 calls before she'll give him a specific apartment number, a specific suite number, specific address, so that she can monitor cars coming in. If it's an apartment complex, she can see, are cars coming in that appear to be police cars or undercover cars? Do they see patrol cars? That kind of thing. So there's some of the other things that are done.
And you mentioned on that page, there's a phone number that will be attached to the internet. Is that right?
That's correct.
And when that number is called, for example, when you call that number or mail detectives have called those numbers, the person on the other line, in your experience, generally doesn't say, okay, I'll agree to have full sex with you for $150. Is that right?
No, that would be very out of character. There's, first off, the individuals on the other end are not, I don't know of very many cases where they use their true information. They're not using their true names. They've got an AKA on their ad. They go by a different name.
And by the way, not to interrupt, but that's another one of the ways to avoid law enforcement protections. If not being honest,
That's correct. Use a different name. That's commonplace. And forgive me, I can't remember what your specific question was now.
I was wanting to get to an understanding of the phone conversation.
Oh, yes, the phone conversation. Thank you. Yeah. We often have men, especially if, and by we I mean female undercover detectives, we often have men call and ask for sex acts on the phone because they want to know what's their money going to get them, especially if this is not something that they've done before or they're not regulars. They'll ask for that, but it's quickly shut down. Women know not to discuss, and women, I keep using the word women, forgive me, I mean individuals in this life, prostitution, again, it could be males, it could be females. They know not to discuss sex acts for money on the telephone because that would be a violation of the prostitution statute. So if that's something that's asked by the caller, it's shut down immediately. There's no discussion of that. There may be discussion about money, a dollar amount for time. There might be discussion about, he might say, hey, can I get a blowjob do you give me can you do full service, which is a blowjob and sex, or can you do Greek, which is a term for anal sex? Whatever it is that he's looking for, he'll ask that on the phone. She'll say, yeah, show up. Or I can do that, or we'll discuss that later. But there's not a conversation about, for $150, I'll provide you with this. That's immediately shut down on phone calls. And we, working undercover, we shut that down with the males also, because that's not consistent with the culture.
Now, in what way is, as far as the females or not going by their real name or having some other name to refer them, what do you see in terms of the Johns of the men seeking sex and their efforts to sort of avoid law enforcement? Being anonymous, and that's what they would.
Yeah, it's interesting. Many of the Johns that call us are calling from their workplace. They're calling from workplace phone number that's got trunked lines, so there's no way to know who's specifically calling us, so that we don't have their phone number. They're calling from blocked phone numbers. They're calling from Google phone numbers, which is a way to anonymize your phone number. Again, this is not all of them, but many of them. Most of them give us fake names. I'll be working an undercover deal inside of a hotel room, and he's been telling me over the course of 3 phone calls that his name is Bill. He gets there, we effect the arrest, and he's really, something very different. So it's commonplace, being that prostitution is illegal, and they know that individuals know that what they are doing is illegal. It's very commonplace for them to not provide their legitimate information, like a legitimate phone number, like a legitimate name.
You could briefly talk about how cash specifically figures into avoiding law enforcement protection in prostitution.
Prostitution world is predominantly cash-based business. Once in a great while, we'll see an escort. Sometimes she'll be working on her own. Most times she's working on her own. Who'll have one of those, on the smartphones, they've got the little square for payment processing. And even on the ads, it'll say, I take Visa. But for the most part, that's a very, very small minority. For the most part, the life in the prostitution world, everything is cash-based. There's no tracking. There's no way for a spouse to find out about that expenditure. So it's a cash-based business.
You touched on this a little bit, but focusing just on the enterprises or businesses, have you seen, as far as massage parlors, but one of the ways to avoid law enforcement is to put a cloak of legitimacy. Hey, we're just massage parlor giving massages. Have you seen that? Talk about that.
Absolutely. We've seen it in massage parlors. We've seen in the city of Phoenix individuals set up as like a porn studio where they're going to do porn when in fact it's a front for prostitution. The ultimate goal is get as much money as you can through these illegal operations, but to avoid law enforcement detection. They want to fly beneath the radar. So there'll be a massage parlor. A female goes in there to get a legitimate massage, they will massage that individual. If they suspect that the person involved might be a cop, they don't ask about happy endings or any additional sex services. They're not providing sexual conduct or contact with every single patron that comes in the business. They have to, I shouldn't say they have to, but many of them maintain a sense of legitimacy to avoid law enforcement detection.
Now, you talked about sort of the ways that the exchange of money is put in place to avoid law enforcement. For example, the money is placed on a counter or furniture, and the female doesn't specifically talk about it. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, are there situations that you've seen or you're aware of in your experience as a detective where the money exchange happens at the beginning, happens at the end, sometimes doesn't happen?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. We contact victims on a very, very regular basis, and we often ask them those questions.
I don't mean to interrupt, but when you say victims, just so we know, sort of,
Sure.
when you say victims, what are you doing?
I'm talking about individuals that we've identified to be victims of pandering cases or to be victims of child prostitution, meaning they have a pimp or they have a trafficker or they have somebody who's directing their activities. And so we come in contact with those individuals, and just through the course of interviews, oftentimes we'll ask those questions. And most often they will report to us that they've been robbed during the course of their activities as prostitutes. And by robbed, they mean that a John or a customer, they gave them a sex act, they did what they were going to do, and then when they were getting money, there was no money. He says, oh, I got to run out to my car, I forgot my wallet, and never came back. So they were robbed. They'll talk to us about that. We've also heard from some victims about how they were beat because they didn't get money up front, because that's something that is commonplace, to get money up front. And so if they didn't get money up front and they didn't get money as a result, they're beat by their pimps. We also have males that work in an undercover capacity, as I mentioned, in massage parlors. It's commonplace to pay the house fee when you get there. You know, oftentimes those massage parlors have doors, so you pay a $40 or $60, whatever the fee might be, to get in the door for a 30-minute massage or an hour-long massage. And then once you're on the table getting massage, then there's discussion about extras. Extras meaning hand jobs, oral sex, full sexual intercourse. And there have definitely been cases where they've discussed, yes, I would like a sex act. The undercover officer gets off the table to get his wallet. She's like, no, we can do that later. And her expectation is that money will be left after the fact. So that does happen.
Mr. Leiter, we're going to take the noon recess. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, please be back at 1:25 in the designated area. Have a nice lunch. Please remember the admonition.
All rise for the prayer.
Yeah. Oh, done. Okay. Are they gonna lock this? We better take this off. They might lock. Do they lock the door? I keep looking at. We gotta.
Shut up. There are a few times I keep looking at you. Did you do one of these numbers? Like, okay.
Ooh, I got
I look over at you.
Judge, obviously, as you know, Detective Campbell's on the stand right now. We're not going into her specific investigation of the Goddess Temple at this point in time. My understanding is Mr. Leiter thinks he has maybe 15 minutes or so left on his direct examination.
Okay?
I spoke with Ms. Elise about how long she thinks she's going to be on cross-examination, and it sounds like she's going to be on it for quite a while. We have another witness here, which is Rebecca Carrera. I was just provided today by Ms. Elise with a number of emails that she plans on using. I've never seen these before. There may be even more that I still don't have. Ms. Carrera is not available on Monday, so what I'm asking from the court at this point, Judge, is maybe possibly, if necessary, finish a little bit early today, not put Ms. Carrera on, because I want to review, obviously, emails that are going to be used with her in cross-examination. Plus, I don't want to break up her testimony if we can avoid it. So I don't think we're going to finish very early, but we may finish a little bit early. But I'd like to release Ms. Carrera so she doesn't have to sit here all afternoon.
She can't come back Monday, but she can come back one day next week?
She's out the next week, Judge, so we'd be calling her the following week.
Okay. Yes, well, that's up to you. She's released. If we finish early, Mr. Green needed to go a little early today anyway because of some other family responsibilities. All right, and let's talk about next Wednesday, which is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Do you have witnesses scheduled for that day?
Not specifically yet, Judge, we don't.
Well, typically we take the afternoon, but if you had witnesses, we were going to be here. But my guess is that most of the jurors would appreciate having that day off. We're here, but...
We have no objection. We have no objection to taking that day off, Judge, but we'll...
No objection. I think he's going to start jumping up and down here. So, okay. Do you have any objection, Ms. Elise, if we tell
No,
the
Your
jury?
Honor, and I want to apologize to everyone. I thought I understood the unfolding of events. I understand now that I was supposed to have all my evidence 7 days from in the past, and so I'm going to immediately get email correspondence between myself and the co-defendants and get that to the state as quickly as possible. They might even be able to use that day, looking at the emails. I don't know. There's a lot of them.
Okay. But we'll be able to start Monday at 10:30. You'll have witnesses for all day Monday and Tuesday.
Yes.
Okay. I'll let the jury know then. All right, so she's excused and we'll move on.
Do we want to talk about scheduling something about Tamara Brusso's testimony?
Well, tomorrow we don't have trials Friday.
Okay. I just want to digest what I'm saying.
I thought you said tomorrow, and you said tomorrow.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I have a co-defendant who passed away, and
Oh, you said tomorrow.
Tamara.
Oh, I thought you were saying tomorrow. Oh,
She's
okay.
laughing right now because that was the joke of her lifetime, and now Tamara's with us because that was the big joke that she always said.
Okay.
Tomorrow, Tamara. Perhaps we could just quickly maybe decide if that's worth having a little hearing at some point.
Is that relates to this motion that you just filed?
Yes. I mean, we don't have to act upon it. I don't know when the state's going to start talking about Tamara Brusso, and we don't have to obviously have any kind of hearing about how to handle what came out of her mouth, what she said and did. And I don't need to do anything until it begins to be in their case, and then I would want some delineation based on the fact that she's not here to say anything back, and she did die without planning to take a plea. She was, strongly on the team. She co-founded the Mystic Sisters. She co-founded the Goddess Temple.
Mr.
Your
Lytle?
Honor, certainly anything that Ms. Brusso said to Detective Campbell or any law enforcement after the arrest would be hearsay. Obviously, she is unavailable, but that is hearsay, and we wouldn't seek to elicit it. I can tell you, in talking to Mr. Sammons, the extent of the testimony that we would elicit from Ms. Brusso would be specific conversations that she had with Detective Campbell or others while she was working or at the temple, and the state would, and we can respond specifically, but we would seek to elicit that testimony as co-conspirator statements in furtherance of the conspiracy. So it would be things that she said while working at the temple, some of which is recorded, and there's some phone conversations, again, while she was in the working or placed as a gatekeeper. But anything beyond that, specific conversations that were had with law enforcement, it would be improper hearsay, and the state would not elicit any statement she made after her arrest. But I will respond in written form so the court
All right.
delineate what we're going to elicit.
Your Honor, I'd like to just quickly respond verbally if possible.
Sure.
There's just been a large misunderstanding from the state about who Tamara Brusso, what her role was at Temple. She had full-time Medicaid, Medicare for both mental and physical health issues. She could not work mentally or physically. She did not ever have training to be the gatekeeper. She was not a gatekeeper. She was not a temple mother in the sense that she took people in the way Janet did. And this is their presentation. And so I've got to present to you, Your Honor, counter evidence, because when you take it in the framework that she was this trained person and that was her job, that's absolutely not true. Her job was spiritual advisor to the women. She was the one who would listen to their woes all day long. That was her job. And so they're characterizing her as a gatekeeper. And it's just not true.
Okay.
She flowed into those jobs when someone needed to have someone cover it because no one else was available. That's how she was.
Okay, well, I think I understand your concerns. That is the purpose of cross-examination, to challenge the testimony presented by the state, and you may certainly do so. If you're going to file a motion to preclude certain evidence, you may certainly do that. The state's has already indicated their intention and what they're going to do with her statements and how they're going to elicit that testimony. To me, again, we're back down to trying to script it out, and I just think that you need to object to a question when it's raised, and we can talk about it then.
Okay. I'm just concerned because since she's not here, how do I prove her and I's relationship? How do I prove what her actual role was? Can other people talk about her then, I guess? Is that how that would work? Other people would talk about her since she's not here?
It depends on in what fashion the question is posed, whether or not it would be hearsay.
Okay, so just as it happens, if it sounds unbalanced, just object. Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Let's bring in the jury.
Those were issued
They have the
information
for Thanksgiving.
the news, so the news was it.
I think we have it.
We were in the news, isn't here. But that's okay.
I'll go into Tuesday.
All right.
No.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Mr. Leiter, you may continue with direct examination.
You are. Now, Detective, as you understand it, is this the only time you're going to be testifying in this trial?
No, I anticipate being called numerous times related to my involvement in this investigation.
Specifically, again, everything falls on the head of the case agent, right?
Yes, that is correct.
So there will be some various, right now, the focus of your testimony is not on anything specific to the investigation, but your testimony is focusing on your general experience and what you've seen in being a bystander. Is that right?
That's what I understand it to be, yes.
Now, you have touched on this a little bit during your testimony before lunch. Through a large scale or a business-oriented investigation?
As I previously mentioned, we learn about these organizations through various means. Many times they're through tips or complaints that come into our office. And when we get a complaint, we have a responsibility to investigate that complaint. So usually the first thing that we do is to do our background research on that location, calls for service, police reports, Google searches. There's also various websites out there that we can search that provide us with information about establishments, escort type establishments, or just various internet research. I also typically check the Corporation Commission when I'm dealing with an establishment. And from there, once we have background research done, the next step is generally doing surveillance out at the location. And the surveillance could be a matter of driving through a parking lot to get license plates to try to establish who's working in the business, who's operating the business, that kind of thing. Or it could be sitting across the street, sitting in a neighborhood, and doing long-term surveillance of that location, just to establish the comings and goings. Does it look like an establishment that's predominantly being visited by females? Does it look like males are the predominant customer base? So establishing that understanding right from the get-go is pretty important to us, just to know kind of the inner workings, how many people that we perceive to be employees coming and going, are we seeing the same people there on a daily basis, that kind of thing. And then after we do that initial surveillance and all the research, internet type research and computer research, then we will generally set up undercover undercover operations, where undercovers are sent into the location. Ascertain, is there anything illegal going on? Are they able to obtain prostitution deals, or are they not? In many cases, they're not. And we move on. When prostitution deals are obtained inside the business, then follow-up undercover operations are scheduled, along with, as I mentioned, female individuals, female undercover detectives will reach out to the business and attempt to gain employment there, or at least broach the conversation. Many times they're not hiring, but at least we'll talk to somebody on the phone and find out kind of who's in charge, who makes that decision that they're not hiring. So we will generally try that technique. And then after the undercover operations, in many cases we will do some traffic stops, not always. It's the goal of and I'll get back to that thought because I know that was kind of incomplete, but the goal of an illegal enterprise or a house of prostitution investigation is to close the business if there's illegal activity going on. So there's less emphasis on making arrests of customers as they leave or contacting customers as they leave, because we don't know if this is a regular customer. We don't know if we've mistaken a customer that's leaving as a husband of one of the girls that's in there, as a brother, as a possible manager. So in some cases with the illegal enterprise type operations, massage parlors, houses of prostitution, we will make traffic stops of individuals leaving, question them, determine what they're willing to provide. Sometimes they'll be forthcoming about different sexual acts that occurred inside. Other times they're not. But with that, you run the risk of jeopardizing an entire investigation if you're contacting and asking questions related to activity inside. If it's somebody that's either a regular customer who's frequents that establishment, frequents that individual on a regular basis, or if it's somebody that's actually leading or directing the organization. So that's something that's usually done at the end. And then generally, once we feel like we have enough information about the activity, we proceed to writing search warrants and moving forward from there.
Now, you said that the enterprise investigation focuses on shutting the business down, who is running the business, and in some cases some of the employees, i.e. again, typically women who are engaged in acts of prostitution, correct?
That's correct. We focus on the individuals who are directing the efforts, leading the organization.
As a vice detective, in your experience, do you do other operations? Let's just take a step back away from the enterprise type investigations where the specific goal is to target jobs or men seeking sex.
Absolutely. We understand with everything there's supply and demand, and without a customer base, houses of prostitution are not in existence. So we spend a tremendous amount of time in the city of Phoenix, dating all the way back to when I was a patrol officer, focusing on customer apprehension programs is what we call it, where we are working in an undercover capacity with the sole purpose of arresting the customer base who's seeking those services. And we continue that today.
Now, later on in the trial, we expect to have testimony about specific undercover deals that went on. Can you give us, again, generally speaking, how an undercover deal, in terms of a male detective going into an establishment, how that works, at what point, in your experience, there's enough to say you've met the definition of prostitution?
So as I mentioned to you earlier, we have clear and defined policies or protocols that dictate our ability to work undercover. And by that I mean that male undercover detectives are not allowed to actually receive acts of prostitution or receive sexual acts, period. It's not allowed. I just want to be clear about that. And so what male detectives do is, and I don't want to go into anything that would compromise future investigations, but the goal is to, like for instance, going into a massage parlor, receiving a massage, determining whether or not any extras are provided, and then from there,
I object, Your Honor, to this particular testimony.
Approach, please.
Thank you.
No, right into this.
Onto this, okay. The main frame of my defense is mindset and all of that. And Detective Campbell, it has been super clear in all of the pretrial interviews that all of the detectives, the police officers, they say they decide in the field what is an act of prostitution and what is not. They all say the same thing, that it's different every time and that they have to decide in the field. And now she's determining what an act of prostitution is, and because all the testimony is the other way, and now she's making a generalized statement. I feel that she's sort of practicing law, interpreting law to the jury because there has been no framework of the actual, like none of the testimony. They calls for a legal conclusion. That her testimony is enacting her to make a legal conclusion before the jury, which is their job to do.
She's speaking hypothetically. She's not speaking about anything related to this particular case. Is that correct?
That's correct, Judge. The intention of this line of questioning is for Detective Campbell, who, as a case agent, would at least be involved in undercover deals where male detectives would meet with females, monitoring those deals, and a decision is made. It's not always the same, and this is an area that certainly Ms. Elise could question Detective Campbell in cross-examination, but when they've made a decision, then that's enough to move on and continue the investigation.
Okay, just clarify that. Objection overruled.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Detective, as the case agent in other situations where you have sort of overseen the investigation, has it been within your responsibilities to at least monitor a male detective encounter or attempt to deal with like possible problems?
In almost every undercover operation, we have individuals monitoring the deal, and many of those instances, I'm a monitor. Usually if a male detective's going in, then a female detective will monitor the deal. And by monitoring, what I mean is we are listening to the exchange that happens inside the location because they don't have backup or support inside there. And for officer safety reasons, we monitor the exchange of information between the two so that there's code words for he's got a gun or she's got a gun or I'm harmed, or they verbalize what's the harm that they experience. And as the monitor, our job is to ensure officer safety so that we have a radio and we can get troops in there or get officers in there right away if some harmful situation presents itself. So that is my job as a monitor. So yes, I have listened to numerous conversations inside establishments where there's an exchange going on back and forth between our male UC and a female who's working in that establishment, female and male. Our male UCs with a male escort or a female working in those establishments.
Fair to say that every single case and every single interaction between an undercover male detective and say female, it's not always the same in terms of the conversation or when a decision is made that, all right, they said certain things such that we think you can effectuate arrest, correct?
Absolutely, every situation is different. I don't know of any one situation that's the same. And it's not up to us as a monitoring individual to determine when the officer or the detective who's inside obtaining or having that exchange. It's not up to us as the monitor to determine when they believe they have probable cause for a violation or for an offense. They, as the detectives who are inside in the room, who can hear everything, they make that determination when they think they have probable cause for an arrest, and then they alert us of that fact as a monitor.
Oftentimes, you can only hear the audio, you can't see what's going on in a hotel room or in an apartment, correct?
Absolutely, and a lot of what happens with hand gestures because a lot of the folks, individuals working inside of these establishments are concerned about recordings happening. So I know many massage deals where the deal is happening and we don't know the entire complexity of that deal because so much of it is, this or, hand motions, mouth motions, that kind of thing between the detective and the female involved. So we don't have the basis for determining whether or not a prostitution deal is made. That's totally up to the undercover detective inside the business or in apartment or wherever he might be.
Returning to, again, large-scale investigations, you've given examples where there's been some male detectives who've gone undercover, and then sometimes you or other female detectives will try to get a job, for example, in a massage parlor or something like that. Obviously, it's the policy of the Phoenix Police Department where if you do get a job, you do not engage in any sort of sex act. So, in situations like that, and again, large-scale investigations, you've been able to talk to someone in charge or someone who has the ability to hire, go to work. How does that work exactly? Where you were going undercover and working at stuff?
Well, I bring in my condoms and lube and other props that somebody working in that environment would have with them and set up shop in a room, and male undercover detectives would come up to the door looking for the services of a massage therapist or an individual working in that massage location, and I would be there. I would be the person that they get, and we go back into a room. The individual believes that I'm engaging in sexual acts with this individual. Obviously, I'm not. But after a period of time, the male undercover leaves. Another male undercover may come in half hour later, same thing goes on. Money is then provided to the person who's leading the organization with the understanding. I let them know that I gave this guy a blowjob, a hand job, had sex with him, whatever the case might be, so that they have an understanding that these proceeds were from those supposed acts that they were led to believe that I performed on these undercovers, to establish that this is something that they condoned, this is something that they were accustomed to, just to establish an understanding that this is an illegal enterprise.
So you've gone about your investigation, you've done your internet research, you have done surveillance, you have 1, 2 additional undercover deals on occasion, you or an detective, female detective undercover, and you decided, you know what, this particular massage parlor, just by way of example, you know the prostitution's going in, and we're going to finish the job and shut it down. And at that point, will the Phoenix Police Department, specifically the Vice Unit, write search warrants and then execute search warrant on that particular location?
Yes, it's one of two ways. Search warrants are written, and it's just a matter of, do we effect arrest after the fact or before via grand jury?
Once you get into business, like a massage parlor, for example, are there specific things, you want to talk to the other people who are working there, correct?
Correct.
Are there other things that you are looking for, again, looking at a large scale, what you refer to as an enterprise investigation, documents, things that you're looking for as a detective to say, all right, this is going to show what was going on in this particular job?
Yeah, absolutely. We are looking for, through interviews and through documentation, we're looking for evidence and asking the questions such that we can ascertain whether, well, first off, who's in charge? How are their hiring practices look? What is the cut? What is the split? How much are they charging? Who's establishing that fee structure? What are the rules? And many of the massage parlors, there's actually rules posted on, on doors or windows and visible to the public. Who established those rules? Who made those rules? Who's enforcing those rules? We are trying to, again, determine who is in control, who is in charge of that establishment, who do they report to, who did the women working inside there interview with, how did they obtain that job, and then kind of what does it look like? Are they required to perform certain acts? Are they sexual acts? Are they required to charge certain fees? And we're also looking for documentation related to that. We're always, during search warrants, looking for financial documentation. Do they have bank accounts? Whose names are on the accounts? Do they have money deposit slips? Do they have envelopes with cash? In a lot of the massage parlors, they put money in envelopes, and they have like a kind of like a safe, but in many of the massage parlors, it's like a little tray that comes down that's locked, so somebody comes at the end of the night and pulls those envelopes out, so the girls will write, how much money they made, and put those envelopes in there with the cash for the house's piece. So we're trying to establish the control aspect, and I know I've said this time and time again, but in a lot of businesses or illegal enterprise investigations, we don't know at the onset who's in charge. All we know is who's working in the business. We've been able to run license plates and figure out what the names of these different girls are, but we don't know who's directing their efforts. So that's a huge portion of our illegal enterprise investigations, is to try to figure out who's in charge and what are they in fact directing these girls to do.
Wait a moment.
Yes.
Now, in large scale operations where decisions been made to do a search warrant. But let me ask you this: device detective on TV, whoever the detective is, they get to burst down the door with a gun and arrest whoever's in there. That's what we see on TV.
That might be what you see on TV. That's not always accurate. The way the Phoenix Police Department handles search warrants, it varies. It varies based on the location, the size of the location. It's varied based on the criminal element that we're dealing with. If we're dealing with individuals that are responsible for trafficking in firearms or where there's known propensity for violence, in those cases, our special assignment unit is used. That's what many of you may refer to or may hear as SWAT, the masked guys, that kind of thing. Those individuals will execute where there's dangerous type situations. And they're also the group that's responsible for executing warrants when we have large scale buildings where there's multiple entrances, multiple rooms. They receive a tremendous amount of training on how to execute warrants that me as the lowly vice detective don't have. And so anytime we're dealing with lots of rooms, large scale, our SWAT assignment unit, our special assignment unit, is responsible for executing those warrants to ensure there's no crossfire and that kind of thing. If we're dealing with an apartment, perhaps, where it's a brothel, a residential brothel, where there's one door in, there's no balcony, there's no way for them to escape, and maybe there is a way for them to escape off of a balcony, and we know we've been in there in an undercover capacity and there's 2 rooms and this is the way you can go. We serve those warrants, or we have a neighborhood enforcement team who receives a little bit more training than us. We have them serve those warrants. So we do serve warrants, but not usually when we're dealing with commercial type buildings or when there's armed felon, dangerous type felons.
Situations where there's a large or larger building, and as far as who specifically is in that building is unknown. That would be a situation for officer safety where maybe the special assignments or the SWAT team would be responsible for doing the search.
That's correct. We never know who's inside of a building.
Now, Detective, returning back to where we started this morning, been vice detective for 6 years now, approximately?
5.5, yeah, close to 6.
Round enough. Any interest in doing different kind of detective work in the department, violent crime, something else? As far as your career?
Actually, an interesting question. I thought by now in my career I'd actually be in a sergeant position. I always had aspirations of promoting, but I found this work so rewarding, and I found interacting with the victims so rewarding, and I felt like I could really make a difference in their lives, that I have no plans, at least in the near future, to leave this position. I'm not trying to leave, I'm not hoping to leave, and I'm not studying for the next sergeant's test that's going to be coming up because I really enjoy the work that I do.
And I think that you talked about the transition that's occurred in the police department vice unit, where it could be young girls, obviously, or women who are in the life of prostitution, they're viewed as victims. And that is kind of what fair to say that this sort of drives why you remain a vice detective?
Absolutely. I would never be in this position if it was the way it was in 2004, 2005, where we were going out making arrests all day. That's not fulfilling for me as an individual, and I would definitely not be in this position if that was the case. I enjoy the interactions with the victims, getting them resources, getting them out of the life, doing what I can, just a small piece to make a positive influence in their life. And it's just really rewarding, and I have no interest in changing job positions as a result, at least for the near term. I don't know what will happen 5-10 years from now, but I'm happy where I'm at.
Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yes. I like to refer to them as victims because I don't meet too many who are not victims of either a trafficker or a pimp or victims of their own circumstances. So yes, that's what I'm referring to. I haven't.
You talked about crossfire as well. You said it's a big building, too many entrances and exits, hallways. And so thing you specifically want to protect the officers from would be crossfire. I don't want the words in your mouth.
I did mention the word crossfire. I can't speak to exactly how they operate because I don't receive that level of training. Anytime we're dealing with large buildings where there's multiple doors that face each other, I mean, I've been through several building search classes myself, and you're always in a situation where there's lots of openings. You have to cover multiple openings. You need lots of manpower, and you need specialized training because we don't get trained in large-scale buildings. And so crossfire is one component, but I can't speak to all of the other considerations because I don't receive that training to know.
Okay, thank you. I did want to spend just a little bit more time, though. In your 6-month investigation, did you ever find any evidence that any person in any of the temples was carrying a weapon?
I did not.
Did any of your people report that there were weapons seen or spoken of?
There were not.
Were weapons found at the temple during any of the buildings that were raided? No weapons found.
There were not.
Okay, so there was no indication of weapons, but the weapons still had to be used. Even though I'm saying, whoever makes that decision because the building is big, there was no report from you, say, to the upper management that's going to do this, to say, hey, these people are killers, and, we haven't heard of any cluster crimes, I think they're called, related crimes, drugs, weapons, underage, there was no doubt.
I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what your question is. Your question?
There was no weapons found.
No, there was no weapons found.
So, so it's the potential that there might be a gun is why your understanding of why they would swarm the building with sending on that.
No, not at all. In fact, I believe I just mentioned that the reason why this, again, I didn't make the decision, but The reason why the decision was made to involve our special assignment unit was not because of weapons or danger to the people inside, but because of the large scale the large size of the building, and the expertise that they have. Anytime we go into a building, there's unknowns. We have no idea. We've never interacted with everybody involved. We don't know what's in, your particular space had multiple floors, and we, as undercovers, had never been to any of those floors. So it was not reported to them that there were weapons involved, and the decision to involve the special assignment unit was not a decision I had any part in, but I can tell you I'd never reported to anybody that there were weapons or anything to that effect.
And that decision was, can you maybe tell me so I can get a little into that later, who made that decision to use the SWAT, or how who's controlling that? Because the rule of the building is there. I just need to put a little bit of effort into that.
Sure. I don't know who made the ultimate decision, but I can tell you that my sergeant, Sergeant Sutherland, has responsibility as my supervisor to engage in those conversations related to that. So he could probably answer that for you.
Yes. I understand a lot of this is hierarchical decisions. I really respect that and all.
Thank you.
So, in your testimony, you spoke of subcultures and that subcultures have language. You spoke of the language of the subculture of prostitution, and it sounded like you were kind of quoting street level prostitution, like that particular language. So, I wanted to ask about, obviously, police have specialized language, management, subculture of prostitution has specialized language, and the temple has specialized language. I'm going to go to an interview that we did in trial preparation where you said that
Objection, improper impeachment, Your Honor.
Sustained.
during the course of the investigation over 6 months, did you ever receive from anyone at the temple a glossary of terms, a list of the words to use in the temple?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And you received one in email, I believe?
Yes, that's correct.
And then you received one in writing, or one of the other undercover officers actually received something from Janet Payton because they came in and interviewed, they were handed actual papers that had the glossary, a larger glossary.
Yeah, and as a case agent, I did see additional paperwork. It was not provided to me. I do remember receiving the glossary of terms through email from It was I'm sorry to interrupt you. I did get one as a form of attachment that was several pages long, and then an email that had a very short version.
And so, as part of leading this investigation, tell me about what you did to sort of, since you have your language, prostitution, John's, fees, you have your language that you're using, and then someone had different language. Can you tell us what you did to grok with that?
I'm sorry.
What you did with you presented with these words that you're saying, tell me how that impacted your investigation, how that related to the investigation, or how you used it, how did you use the glossary of terms presented as part of the investigation?
I utilized the glossary of terms to have an understanding of the language that was occurring inside the temple. So, for instance, if in conversations with one of the practitioners, they referred to yoni, I don't know what that means. I didn't know what that meant until receiving the glossary of terms and had conversations with Tamara Brusso. Then I understood it to mean vagina. And so I simply used that glossary to develop an understanding for myself about the various terms that you used to relate it to my layperson's understanding of those words that were familiar to me. The glossary of terms that I had actually provided your term and then the meaning of it. So, yes, if I heard yoni going back to the glossary, I knew that meant I do remember that it was quite long in the description about specific parts of the woman's female anatomy. There were so many terms on there that I would be completely wrong if I tried to recall the specifics. That's correct. I didn't do research beyond the glossary to understand your meaning aside from what was spelled out on that paper.
Arrest situation for prostitution, they make that decision to arrest someone in the moment of going to arrest this person for prostitution, that it really is different every time. That's what I've heard most. And you just kind of said something similar just a little bit ago. That every time you make a arrest for prostitution, it's different every time as to when you know that you're going to arrest them. You're a trigger moment. You say, yep, I got the charge.
Yeah, based on whether or not we have probable cause, if we can articulate the facts leading us to get to the point where we feel like we have probable cause to, in effect, arrest. But what happens leading up to that is very different in every case.
When you said that your personal, what works for you is O&A, offer and acceptance. When you hear an offer of money for sex, and then the money transfers, like, yeah, that's that. That you said that was like a clear, where you mentioned that you actually said something about O&A, offer and acceptance model, which is an actual legal model. You kind of was talking about what works for you when you got that moment. I'm going to decide, and you gave testimony about O&A. Do you want to address that?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is. I do remember you asking. I don't know specifically. I don't recall specifically how I answered the question, but with every statute, we have a responsibility to arrest based on the elements in that particular statute. And for prostitution, once there's been an offer, an acceptance, an agreement for sexual conduct, for a fee arrangement, could be money or something different, then we have established the elements to effect an arrest. And so I believe that's what I was speaking to. I don't know beyond that what more you're looking for. Yes, the victims that I was referring to, and that yes.
And, is there room in your personal model for someone who chooses to do it and they're actually in their power? Is there anything in your experience, professional, personal, that could allow that a woman is absolutely in her power and choosing this and she's not?
As a police officer, we take an oath to protect and to abide by the laws that are present in the state of Arizona, that we have an obligation to enforce those laws. So, no, I'm sorry, but my personal belief about something like that definitely is different in that I'm in a capacity as a law enforcement officer, so I have an obligation to uphold the laws. So, yes. For each charge, it's different. If we're talking about pandering charge, which is some of the charges, then the females that were working within the confines of the temple were the victims of those charges. Well, the way the statute is written, anytime somebody is compelled, induced, or encouraged to live a life of prostitution, to engage in prostitution. What about someone being encouraged to be a healer? When we're dealing with pandering, I'm dealing with the way the law is written, doesn't talk about healers.
Ms. Elise, I'm just going to ask that you let the witness finish her question or her answer to your question before you start the next question so that the court reporter can get down the response.
How many convictions? It's my understanding, I don't know exactly the number, 38, something to that effect, but well, to establish an illegal enterprise, there has to be racketeering, and racketeering, it's a racketeering offense if there's prostitution. So in order for it to be racketeering, there has to be prostitution. In order to have an illegal enterprise, there has to be. So if they're pleading guilty to an illegal enterprise, then they've pled guilty or they've acknowledged that there was prostitution. It's a the way I see it, and I'm not a legal scholar in any respect, and I don't profess to be, but the way I see it is in order to have an illegal enterprise, there is prostitution because it's a racketeering offense which is involved with the illegal enterprise. So if you're acknowledging or pleading to the fact that you were part of that illegal enterprise, then you are also pleading to the fact that there was prostitution activity at the temple.
I would like to
Objection.
Hold on, sustained. Sustained. Correct.
going back to police academy training, and you spoke about that your training did involve the Constitution. Do you recall at Academy how many hours of training went into constitutional issues as a law enforcement officer? Was that a 2-hour class, a 1-week semester class on the Constitution?
The Constitution portion, I believe, was between 2 and 3 hours. Oh, no. Well, on the job training, but the actual police academy that you go through to become a sworn police officer it was 17 weeks when I was involved. I believe that's now up to 18 weeks, but it's 17 weeks, 40 hours a week for the initial, and then there's a post-academy afterwards where you learn specifics for your police department, how to use your computer systems, your policies and procedures, that kind of thing, which is another approximately 1 month, 4 weeks. So, but the police academy, 17 weeks, and the constitutional section was, I believe, 2 to 3 hours.
And then after, like a lot of industries, they require continuing ed, and so does your profession require continuing ed on topics that massage people, different people require upgrading your skills. Do you have a program like that?
We did initially, and then we went several years without what we call a module, where you receive additional training. Every year you're required to qualify with a firearm, but the continuing ed that I believe you're speaking about was not required for several years, and it was just reinstated as of this year.
I just want to speak generally, being a police officer, will you then ever receive any additional updates on constitutional law, new constitutional law, anything like that, as it applies to law enforcement? Do you call it seeing or attending an update on constitutional law?
We regularly receive emails with legal briefs and how case law is interpreted. Our legal unit sends us out emails about, a new court case on search and seizure or whatever the case might be, which involves some aspects of the Constitution, but we don't actually attend, or I haven't yet. I'm not saying that I don't know what will happen next year, the year after regarding that, but I have not attended any updated constitutional law type training, and certainly an officer could seek out that type of training if it was something that was interested in. Most of the training that we attend is training that we actually, if we have an interest in a particular area, we sign up, register for that training, but it's not mandated.
Sure, I apologize. May we approach?
You may.
Your Honor, and I may be wrong, but it's my belief Ms. Leese is going down a path of Detective Campbell's specific understanding of either the U.S. or the state constitution and freedom of religion, and it's the state's position that anything along those lines is an improper and irrelevant line of questioning, and specifically would confuse the jury about what their ultimate responsibility is.
Okay. Your Honor, that's actually not what I'm up to. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to get to the part where I asked Detective Campbell. She was aware that it was a temple and a church. It said so on the website. She did a certain amount of research about the church, the status of the church. I was going to get into that, and then I was going to simply say, and your superior officers instructed you that church or not, it didn't matter. And then if she says yes, which she will, because that decision, the decision that nothing constitutional applied to us was made before she received the case. And I just want to get to that part, and then I will stop that line of questioning. I just want her to be able to say the decision that if whether or not we were a church did not matter, she was not to view it that way, she was not to investigate it that way, she was not to apply anything that way. She said that decision had been made before the case was handed to her. And there's a lot of interesting stuff behind that I want to get with the subpoenas. But I do feel that I'm not trying to talk about freedom of religion or anything. I'm trying to get to the point at which everything that happened below this line was because of there was a line that was held above Detective Campbell and above Amanda Herman, where the state made this decision without harms, without any judicial review or, scrutiny, and just made the decision that we had zero status under the law, zero, which I'm still living with in this court today. And I need to bring up my mindset because I've always been a church. And I'm not asking for religious shielding here. I'm getting to the sequence in which she was instructed that whether or not we were a church, it didn't matter. And the jury needs to hear that.
The state's position, Judge,
That's the state's position. It doesn't matter.
Is by implication that is referring back to freedom of religion, the responsibility of a law enforcement agent to go into whether or not there is a church. The state's position is that line of questioning is irrelevant.
Your Honor, it's my mindset. I was the entire time working with officials in 3 cities who did see me as a real church.
Okay, what you're trying to have her establish is that she was aware that you were holding yourself out as a church to the public. And did she discuss that with her supervisors? Is that what you want to know?
That's the exact thing I'd like to ask, because her answer is, yes, that decision had already been made, that whether it was a church or not didn't matter. And I just needed to say that because that's huge to my case.
No, I think that's okay. It was just I didn't want any implication of the First Amendment, and that what I think would confuse the jury as to what the responsibility is.
We agreed to not talk about it until the end of the trial when I've established that I'm a church, and I'm willing to do that. I've got totality of circumstance.
All right. So you may inquire in that limited manner in which we just described. All right.
Because
Sorry, do you want to
I think I'm good.
I was actually handed the Phoenix New Times article, and that was what I was given.
Did you also receive phone logs from people who called that were mad, or emails from people who called
The initial article was the article as a standalone. After a couple of days, I believe the article was handed to us within a day or a couple of days of it actually being published. And then for the next few weeks after receiving the article was given to myself and my partner, the co-case agent, Detective Herman. I'm pretty sure we got that article. I don't want to point to a specific number of times because I'd hate to be wrong in that number, but multiple times from different sources. We received it from somebody at the City Hall, somebody from another police agency. We received it from our own command staff within our building, and everybody, those individuals that provided it to us, inquired as to whether or not we were going to investigate to determine if there was acts of prostitution occurring. As the investigation progressed, we received, I believe, 2 anonymous letters that came in about prostitution activity in the temple. Those were impounded. We received a complaint from a patrol officer, I believe it was a patrol sergeant, who a community member, concerned community member, had visited the temple and was concerned about activity that she witnessed there. I believe she was an HOA representative or something in the neighborhood. And so as we were already beginning our preliminary investigation of the temple, different sources were inquiring as to whether or not we were investigating. It's not common practice for us to keep a log sheet, as you just referred to it, of specifics. Oftentimes there are anonymous complaints or anonymous tips, so I couldn't even tell you who in City Hall had concerns. I couldn't tell you if it was a city staff member or if it was one of their constituents that handed them the article at a community meeting. I couldn't tell you that. Oftentimes when we're dealing with concerns or complaints, they come to us anonymously. And but I can tell you we received that article at least, I want to say 3 times, and then throughout the course of our investigation, as a month or so went by, we started receiving a couple of letters and calls.
God's temple and the surrounding temple prior to the article in Arizona and in Nevada. And when I asked you, like your testimony said, mob bosses, criminal people, they always are discreet, they're very low profile, and yet the Phoenix God's temple has been used many times. Many times. Every time a reporter came, we said, sure, come on in and talk to me. So, kind of doesn't match the profile of the mob boss to take interviews with the press. Would you agree with that?
Just to clarify, I have never interacted with a mob boss or a mob, or when I'm talking about, what I was talking about earlier was leaders of an illegal enterprise. I think that was your term, mob boss. But there are many illegal enterprises that are out there in the public, meaning that they have storefronts, like a massage parlor. You're right. I don't know too many of those businesses that are asking for reporters to come in and spot.
Your Honor, is there a question?
Sustained.
Have you ever seen other massage parlors invite the press to tour the facility and see ceremonies on the
I have never seen that. I've never seen that at an escort agency.
So you also talked about how the person in charge usually doesn't use their real name, and then you have the focus of the investigation is to find out who's in charge. So isn't it true though that on the Phoenix Goddess Temple website I was listed as found her as in found the goddess. I was listed as mother priestess or at least mother. It's quite clear on the website who was in charge.
I do agree, but one thing that you just said, I just want to make it clear. You said our focus of the investigation is to figure out who's in charge. Our focus is actually to determine whether or not there's prostitution activity occurring there. And then once that's determined, then we try to establish who's in charge. But yes, you're correct. Your name was listed on your website as the person in charge. Correct. That's correct. Yes.
So a number of people were actually not ashamed, apparently, because they used their legal names. You agree that many people use their legal names, and that doesn't fit the profile of most people in sex work who use fake names to try to hide their.
Yeah.
So that would be contrary to the industry. You say that?
Using your legal name is contrary, but I think you just made the comment that most people use their names at your organization. It was actually, I believe, only like 3 or 4 people out of the 40-something that used their true names. Okay.
Speaking of fake names, have you ever heard of a practice in ashrams, Hindu or Sikh temples, pagan rituals, goddess rituals, even Christian rituals, where people take on a name for the time that they are in their community, they seek to embody something that's different than who they are in the outside world? You ever heard of anything like that? Like a church, a spiritual group, an ashram will actually, maybe American church does it, bestow a spiritual name on someone that they then try to live up to. You ever heard of anything like that?
I'm sorry, I have no understanding of those religious practices to be able to, I've never sought it out, so I have no basis for answering that question because I honestly have no understanding of any of those religions that you just mentioned. I have, just to be clear, I do have an understanding of the Christian religion, Christianity, and I'm not familiar with the assuming a different name that you just mentioned. But with those other religions, I don't have any understanding.
Okay. Actually, Mary and Joseph are titles in the Sikh community, but we won't get into that. Going back to the presence of the temple in the valley between when we first arrived, Tamara Russo and I first arrived January of 2008. We were planting temple both in Sedona and in Phoenix, 2008. And we went through a very long journey, and then Janet joined and Tamara left, and Tamara left. It was a very long journey of what we call planting temple. We list ourselves as missionaries planting temple. So we were in the valley for, let's see, 8, 9, 10, almost 11, 3.5, 4 years. We were in the valley before the raids occurred, before this upset that we exist. Okay, so I'm stating that as fact. So what is in the police record at the license department about the Phoenix Goddess Temple between January of 8 and this investigation began February of 11? That's a good 3-year period. Tell me what was in the files at the Phoenix Police Department Vice Squad regarding the Phoenix Goddess. There must have been something in the files because we were there and you were there. So what was on the file about us prior to the investigation?
When Detective Herman and I were assigned this complaint to investigate, as is customary, vice enforcement detectives share information. We don't have what I believe you're referring to as filing cabinets and files on different establishments. That doesn't exist. But we routinely share information because there's information one detective will have about a particular location, and maybe they received a complaint years ago and might have established information about who was in charge at the time. So there's often a tremendous amount of knowledge amongst vice enforcement detectives. So when we received this complaint, one of the first things that we did was let everybody in the vice enforcement know that we received this complaint and we were going to begin investigating, and just inquired as to whether or not anybody had knowledge of the Phoenix Goddess Temple prior. The only information that we had was from Detective Heidi Chance. She's a detective in the vice enforcement unit that had been there a couple of years before Detective Herman and I, and she had indicated that it was in 2009. I can't speak to the exact month, but in 2009, she had received complaints related to the activity at the Phoenix Goddess Temple, and so she had been assigned a complaint to look into. She had been made case agent of a particular complaint, and she indicated to us that in the very infancy, the very early stages of investigating that complaint, there had been some sort of a meeting, zoning meeting, city meeting, that kind of thing. And she indicated she wasn't in attendance at that meeting. However, she learned after the fact that the location was going to cease from existing. The temple was moving outside the city of Phoenix, or was moving in some respect. And so she indicated to us that I believe it was something to the effect of moving. I can't say for certain you were moving out of the city, in the city, moving around, but you were moving. I distinctly remember there being something to the effect of moving and a zoning hearing, and so.
Your Honor, is there a question? Can I just ask that Ms. Elise ask a question of the witness?
Sustained. Ask a question.
She mentioned a meeting in 2009. I can't recall with certainty that it was May of 2009. She indicated that something happened at that meeting related to you moving. She did not say that she was called off of that investigation. She just indicated something to the effect of you were moving, and she informed Detective Herman and I that the investigation never went beyond her receiving a complaint. So she just flat out said that it wasn't investigated based on some sort of a zoning meeting and a change or movement that was happening.
Stop for a moment and ask about, because that isn't what happened, but I understand. So let's go to, she did not mention when she handed off the Phoenix Goddess Temple that she was the only person in the police department who actually came forward with information about us. Just one person, by any chance. Is the only person that said, yes, I have prior information about this one.
I didn't ask the entire Phoenix Police Department. I don't know who all had information. The only individual that I asked was our vice enforcement detectives, and she was the only individual within the vice enforcement unit that had any knowledge of the Phoenix Goddess Temple, and again, she indicated that it wasn't investigated.
Objection calls for hearsay, Your Honor.
Hold on. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take the afternoon recess. 10 minutes, please. 10 minutes. Please remember the admonition. Base counsel approach.
Your Honor,
Hold on. We gotta wait for that. Okay, here's the problem. You can't make statements and then ask questions. You can ask questions. The purpose of cross-examination is to elicit testimony from the witness, not to give you an opportunity to make statements.
I don't know how to get the answer. I'm going to have to consult a little bit to try to phrase the question. Because what I'm trying to get to is that there actually was a decision made, and it wasn't about us moving out of area. We moved into Phoenix, out of Scottsdale into Phoenix. And so to say that it was dropped because if something is incorrect, there was a prosecutor from the city of Phoenix, there was a vice detective there was a person from planning and zoning, and there was Sal DeCiccio, and there was news crews. And they said, please let me finish. Prosecutor said, this is a delicate First Amendment issue. We're not going to get involved in lawsuits that we can't afford. That's what she actually said. Videotape will show that. And the detective said both the Scottsdale Police Department and Phoenix Police have visited the temple. We have not found any evidence of prostitution. And that was said to a room of about 30 people in the third week of May on a Wednesday at the Camelback Bible Church at 7 o'clock in the evening. It was they reported on it, and believe me, I went home and bought champagne, and we all said, oh my God, they're accepting us with tears of joy. That actually happened.
Okay,
and now she's saying there's no record of any of it.
Okay, no, she didn't say that. She's telling you is what she knows and what she was told. So if you want to present that in another format,
Okay.
you may.
Okay.
But right now, you can't get in the information by making statements and asking her questions. She
I'll just
doesn't
ask
know.
her to say, for the record, all she had was that
Your
one
Honor.
thing from Heidi.
Wait, Your Honor. This was a specific motion filed by the state that Ms. Elise, it's my recollection, on two grounds. One, the relevance, because it all predates the time period of the indictment, and the fact that any information regarding what happened at that meeting would be eliciting hearsay, that Ms. Elise agreed not to go into that. That was and the court did rule in our favor. So
What? I know
We did-
nothing about this.
the state did file a motion regarding 2009
And I heard we
Camelback.
were waiting for the subpoenas to come through before we decided. That's what was my understanding.
Okay, well,
This really happened. There's footage. Sal DeCiccio's involved. These witnesses are probably all still here.
okay, all of this may be true, but let's assume that all of this is true, that this meeting occurred and all these statements were made. How is it relevant to the
My
pending
mindset,
charges?
Your Honor, my mindset.
Yeah.
I thought that I had been accepted by the city with all my processes and procedures and what we were actually doing. And I got that same message from Scottsdale, and I got that same message from Sedona a few months later. So all these city officials said, yes, we believe that you're a church. We know you're doing sacred sexuality. We're going to leave you be. I have that from all these people, and they must be allowed to say something because that was my mindset. I was actually building the programs, thinking we've been accepted.
But what you just said is that one of the detectives said we have no evidence of prostitution.
We have both Scottsdale Police and Phoenix Police have visited the Phoenix Goddess Temple on numerous occasions, and we did not find evidence of prostitution. So that was said to everybody that was there.
So that's the reason that they allowed you to do what you did in terms of moving and the acceptance that you're talking about.
Right.
But after the fact, they did another investigation and that
Your Honor,
changed.
nothing. Our church only became more churchy after this. We had been in houses and homes, then we went into a big building.
Okay. What's that?
Your Honor, I cannot.
What's that?
I believe that was juror in the top, the last juror on the top.
Randy, we just had a juror walk through the courtroom. Yeah, you need to please ask them not to come into the courtroom. Thank you.
Your Honor, I asked for time to prepare a foundational response to this. My understanding was that all the subpoenas had been discussed, they were going out, they'd been issued a couple times already, and this is absolutely relevant. My mindset is and was
that multiple government agencies were accepting us after I met with them on numerous occasions. I have emails of these meetings. I have people who will say, yes, I met with her and this is what we talked about.
But you agree that you were accepted with the understanding that there was no prostitution that was ongoing, correct?
Yes, but everything's the same. Back page ads, everything's the same. Everything's the same. None of it changed. All that happened was we had more and more and more programs.
Your Honor, if I may.
That's all.
The state's position is this has already been ruled on, and Ms. Elise agreed not to go into this.
I did not. This was the petitions were to
Ms.
go
Elise,
out, and then we were going to
if
look
I
at the
could
evidence
speak.
that came back, and then we were going to
Ms. Elise, if I could speak.
Take a deep breath.
Regardless, any questioning of Detective Campbell would be eliciting hearsay. She wasn't present
I'm
for that
going to
meeting.
drop the question you heard.
Anything related to 2009 Bible is she cannot answer.
I understand that.
We will look at the minute entries. We believe that this has been ruled on, but she cannot, any question in that
I will
regard.
swear to high heaven, this is not going to happen. This is my mindset. My meetings with all these city officials is my mindset. There's emails, there's conversations with my co-defendants where we celebrated that we were being accepted.
Okay, she was,
As a minority religion.
Your Honor, Ms. Detective Campbell was not present. She cannot speak to that, so any line of questioning would be improper hearsay.
Okay, so let's just get this, no, let's get this straight right now. With regard to all of these officials, the court is going to conduct an evidentiary hearing before anything goes on, because from everything you just said, which is all I know is what you just said, the circumstances were different when you say that you were accepted, and so there is no relevance.
Your Honor, every aspect of my church was the same. The back page ads, the way we take the money at the end, the procedures, the healings, nothing changed. We only became more churchy, and this is where we get into a new county officer in bias, a new county attorney with bias, and that's where we get into everything that happened in 2010 with my priestess path being destroyed. I'm sorry, Your Honor, this is, wow. I'll just move to other questions. I have dozens of questions.
Randy, did you talk to the juror? Yes, we're taking a break.
Yeah, I would keep it. We should keep it.
Substantially colder in this room. Anywhere in the building. Every time I step out, come back in, I start to like.
Very cold in here today. Some days it's hot, but today it's cold.
I contemplated wearing dresses or skirts, like, you know, and have other people wear, but a jacket and pants, and I'm freezing. Like,
Bring it in, and if he testifies.
I wanted Amber to say.
These are done. Take them.
fuzzy blankets.
That was.
So, tomorrow it seems like our hearing is going to go. I promise you. How many did she
I
have?
don't recall ever feeling this cold in here.
I think we blocked 4 hours.
Yeah.
But then
I remember it being a little cold where I had to warm up eventually, but I don't remember. I came back from lunch and I was
I
walking.
think that we don't have anything
Mary
started
Ruth
at
hi to me, and I was like this.
30, so hopefully we'll all
Like,
be.
oh my gosh, I'm about to get up there. I need to like get this under control.
But yeah.
Oh, yeah, I just write something brief about it.
All rise for the jury.
We're going to have slowly Roberto
And I'll make sure that, because I don't think we have anything else.
Roberto.
Yeah, the evidentiary hearing starts at 8:30, and then we have a settlement conference for some reason at 10:30. And then 11:30, we have that Apache County thing, but that doesn't involve you guys. Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and counsel. Ms. Alicia may continue with cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm learning, and I'm going to take direction so that the structure holds. It's what I did.
The way I understand elements of a crime to be are specific items outlined within the statute. So we have the Title 13, Title 28 book. It's a criminal law book, and under each particular statute within that book, it outlines what's required for an offense. I heard you mention mindset, I believe. There's culpable mental states, I think that you're referring to, that are outlined in that book as well. And so at the beginning of many of the statutes, it says the culpable mental state followed by the elements of that offense. So the elements, not of the mindset, the elements of the crime. So, for instance, pandering, compelling, inducing, encouraging somebody to lead the life of prostitution or be in the life of prostitution. Forgive me, I don't know the exact language, but it tells you what's entailed in that. And in the academy, you asked me specifically related to the academy, we didn't cover that book cover to cover. There's just too much information. That could be entire 4 months in and of itself. But we did highlight particular crimes that were real prevalent: robberies, burglaries, missing persons, or death investigations, that kind of thing. And we would highlight the specific statutes as it related to those crimes. Title 13 has a chapter, or has a statute 13-105 that talks about culpable mental states, I believe is how it's referred to. And there's 4 specifically: intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, or with criminal negligence. You're talking about shooting somebody in a schoolyard versus shooting somebody taking their purse. That would go to, was it something intentional? Was it something they knowingly did? Was it something that was reckless? In looking at prosecution. So for every statute, actually I can't say for every statute because I don't know for certain that that's the case, but like for instance for the prostitution statute, I believe the culpable mental state is knowingly being aware of your actions. So with criminal negligence? We don't have the authority to make the decision about the culpable mental states because in the actual statute it tells us what's required. And so if the statute says knowingly, we have to base our ability or we make a determination based on that culpable mental state. We can't interpret the law to say a different culpable mental state than what's clearly written under each statute.
Objection, Your Honor. Objection, Your Honor, misstates the law, if we can approach.
You may approach. Finish your question.
Go ahead.
Finish your question.
I was trying to determine, when she was investigating the Phoenix Goddess Temple, if knowingly ever entered into her investigation. Did she ever make judgment calls on knowingly? Is that too early
My
to ask?
position is it's a calls for early conclusion, but what Ms. Elise, the question she was asking, she was not insinuating, she was saying outright that the fact that they were practicing church did that figure in. And the case law is very clear, Judge, that a professed religious belief does not negate criminal intent. So right now, that line of questioning is inappropriate because it would certainly confuse the jury about their ultimate decision.
Right, but you put the commerce and criminal on me, and my mindset was completely all the laws in the state of Arizona about religious freedom, religious schools, all of that. I mean, I cannot separate that because that was actually what I was reading as I was building everything.
So what's your question? We're back to the question because
Mindset. Let's see.
Mr. Leiter thinks you were asking one thing. I was unsure what you were asking.
About knowingly, did she apply the mindset of knowingly to the people at the Phoenix Goddess Temple during her investigation? Did she apply the culpable mindset?
And what
she said that was the one that actually they use in prostitution. They don't use the other three, but they use knowingly.
Well, at what point did she?
I'm going to ask her if she ever at any point in the investigation or discovery determined that people were knowingly. I guess I'm not sure. I'm trying to get to, did she apply knowingly?
Have the court reporter read back what she had gotten.
Well, she only got part of her question out. That's why I asked her to finish her
That
question.
might trigger what she was thinking.
Okay, you know what? I'll drop this line of questioning. We have so much to get through, and
Okay.
we have many opportunities. I'll work on the fine tuning of.
Thank you.
It's interesting, actually. We've talked numerous times about changing the name of our unit because vice looks different across the country. In many vice departments across the country, they investigate sex crimes and drug crimes. Others investigate human trafficking crimes and drug crimes. There's no universal definition for what vice means, as indicated by the responsibilities of vice units across the country. The commonality is that, at least in my experience and what I've seen across the country and interacting with several detectives, is that the commonality is that we investigate human trafficking, sex crimes as it relates to prostitution, not sex crimes as it relates to molestations and sexual abuse. We actually, within the Phoenix Police Department, have a separate unit that does those types of investigations. But the commonality across the country that I've seen is that one crime that's underlying it are crimes related to prostitution and trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking.
In your opinion, were the people at the temple that were arrested as prostitutes, were they victims in your mind? Did you investigate after you've been through all this process of investigating, talking to them? Do you feel now that these 39 people are victims in the way you usually see it?
No, unfortunately, I didn't get the opportunity to speak with all of them, and I wish I would have had that opportunity, but I can tell you that there was definitely victims, as I see them, within the temple. Many of No, the individuals that I've had a chance to interact with, many of them came from backgrounds of sexual abuse, of physical abuse. Many of them had talked about, having financial troubles, having relationship troubles. Many of them indicated that they were troubled prior to coming to the temple, while in the temple. And so I can't speak to everybody, but I can tell you that much of the backgrounds of the individuals that were in the temple is consistent with the victims that I encounter outside the realms of the temple.
Did you hear any of the people say that they were at the temple for healing and education and self-empowerment?
Objection calls for hearsay, Your Honor.
Oh, hold on. Overruled, you may answer.
I did hear from some of the individuals that we spoke with. They were in the temple for the purpose, or they sought out the temple for the purposes of healing, by taking classes, that sort of thing. I don't know that they specifically talked about healing each other. I know some of them did speak about Wayne Clayton and taking healing sessions from him. I do recall that.
So is it consistent that a victim would seek out counseling and healing? That's kind of consistent. Do you agree that that's consistent that victims frequently seek out counseling and healing?
Sure, victims do seek that out, yes.
And so is it the realm of possibility that the people that the state has characterized as victims were actually finding healing and upliftment at the things?
That could be possible.
Going back to how this began, and you got handed Operation God.
No, it was literally just the article. No, we just named it the Phoenix Goddess Temple because that's what you call it. No, we just called it the Phoenix Goddess Temple.
So, you did this article, and then you obviously probably the first thing you did was go to the website.
Your website?
Yes.
Yes, that was one of the first things that I did. I perused the entire website, but there was a lot of content on the website. I did not read line by line every section of the website.
Did you ever at any point in the investigation read the entire website?
Over the course of time, I believe I read all the content on the website. I actually printed off every single screenshot of every single page on the website.
So, at the very beginning of your investigation, and you see that the website says church, temple, nonprofit, we exist to uplift women, the mother, etc. Some of it might have said sacred sexuality. You saw those phrases on the website. Upliftment of women, sacred sexuality.
Honestly, it's been a while since I looked at it, but I do recall seeing something of that sort, yes.
And was that language a little different when you see an escort agency ad or an ad for a massage parlor? Did it have different features and words? Or did it pretty much the same?
No, it looked different.
So it looks different than what you normally see when you're at work. And it says it's a temple, a school, an esoteric school, a training programs for practitioners. You're holding a complaint, the article, and a complaint, and you've been told to start an investigation, and you've taken a semi-good look at the website. And the website purports to be healing, religious, spiritual, nonprofit, sisterhood, all that. So, did you, before you just went right into the investigation, did you question anyone around you or within yourself? Say they're a church, what should I, do I even treat churches differently? Did you, at the beginning, think, do I need to treat a church differently if I'm going to investigate a church? Did you have any thoughts about, I wonder if there's any different things I need to do when I investigate?
No, with every complaint that we get, honestly, it doesn't matter to me as to whether or not they're a school, a business, a church. We are investigating the complaint based on the illegality of of what's going on inside that location. So if it was a different church, a traditional church, we would have done the same thing, investigate it based on the complaint and the information in the complaint, not because it was a church or do things differently because it was a church. That wasn't part of my thinking.
So there has been cases of pedophilia here in the Catholic churches here in the Valley. If you had to go into a church, say, for pedophilia, it's very well known that that has happened, not any one church, but there obviously been in the news. So if you had a case of pedophilia, someone saying that that was happening at the Catholic church, how would you take down the whole church with the choir teacher and everything, or would you just look at the pedophilia?
Well, it's very different in that that would be like a sex crimes case that I wouldn't investigate. To make it more relatable, not that I want to change your scenario, but to make it relatable to the work that I do, if I got complaints of prostitution activity in that church, Catholic church, I believe is what you mentioned, I would investigate it in the same manner, determining who was involved in that enterprise. That was it isolated? Was it the entire group participating in that prostitution? Was it just, forgive me, I don't know what the individuals are called within a Catholic church, but was it the bishop? Is it the priest? I don't know exactly what they're called, but I would be making a determination as to who was involved, and I would be investigating that complaint accordingly. And anybody that was involved in the prostitution within that religious establishment would be involved in the subsequent arrest and follow-up investigation after the arrest. So
there were only 5 people charged with prostitution out of 40. So tell me about the process by which you have 5 people who are actually sort of set up or investigated. The 5 people, according to the state's slideshow, 5 people were accused of actually being prostitutes. But there were 40 people there. There were schools, all these different programs. So how did the decision get made? We're going to take all of this down: the school, the healing and rehealing circles, the sisterhood circles, the ordination of the priesthood. How was the decision made to take on the entire establishment when only 5 people were actually found to be potentially prostitutes? How did you go from 5 to let's go get it?
The temple actually did a phenomenal job of putting pictures up on the website of, like you mentioned, yourself, Janet Craven, Tamara Brusso. I believe Tamara was listed as a practitioner. I can't recall that off the top of my head right now, but you did a phenomenal job of listing out all the practitioners within the organization. And when we obtained prostitution deals with 5 of the practitioners side by side with a picture of another practitioner, those individuals have the same job responsibilities or the same role within that temple. They get included as part of the illegal enterprise. As you very well know, there were many people within the temple that were not charged, and many of them being temple men, or I don't know exactly what you referred to them as, priests or.
So you basically went after taking down the entire organization because people were just basically next to each other, and they were implicated by presence, they were implicated through being there.
They
having a similar statement on it.
They, not just based on a similar statement on a website, but they had the same job responsibilities. They were listed each day. The temple listed practitioners available for sessions and named exactly which practitioners were available in Temple for sessions that day. And so on my days off, on my days that I was working, I would log onto the website, figure out who was working in that given day, print the page that listed all the people, the practitioners that were offering sessions, and literally stored them up in a book for several months. So I knew exactly who was working in that capacity on a daily basis. And that, along with our own surveillance about who was coming and going, is how we made the decision as to who was going to be implicated in the criminal enterprise. Ultimately, it's not totally our decision, obviously working with the attorneys to decide.
So there were attorneys consulted within the Phoenix City Phoenix attorneys, or was it attorneys consulted about taking down
The City of Phoenix only handles misdemeanor crimes, and when we're talking about illegal enterprises, it's a felony crime, so we work with the county attorney's office, but ultimately the decision was made to go to grand jury prior and actually have arrest warrants prior to serving the search warrant at the temple. So the county attorneys were consulted because we had to go to them to get the grand jury indictments.
So let's talk about that. And so your testimony is that whether or not it was the church didn't matter. Whether or not it was the church, it didn't affect anything that you did not affect your investigation at all.
That's correct.
Okay. So for the record, let the record show that the fact that the Phoenix Goddess Temple and the Sedona Temple, School Temple are, it did not matter.
Your Honor, I would ask that
Yes.
you not address the jury and
No. No. Ms. Elise, it doesn't work that way. All right. Ask another question.
During our pre-trial interviews, in preparation for today, I asked you if the decision had been made prior to you being assigned the case that the Phoenix Goddess Temple was not a real church, or that even if it was a real church, it didn't matter, didn't deserve any constitutional protections. But that decision that you were not to treat it like a church happened before you received the case assignment.
I'm sorry, I don't know what your question is.
Okay, when you received your assignment, and we spoke on this before, I said, was the decision, I asked you, was the decision to treat the Phoenix Goddess Temple as if it's not a church, or that even if it is a church, it just doesn't matter, that decision was already off the table. No one asked you to say, is this a real church or not? No one ever said, well, let's start with finding out if they're a real church. No one said that.
The decision wasn't made prior to the investigation, prior to me getting the initial complaint. That wasn't made ahead of time. In fact, it wasn't something that we even paid any mind to, because like I said, regardless of whether or not you were a traditional church or a different church, it didn't have any bearing on our investigation. We didn't do anything differently. If you were a church, if you were a massage parlor, if you were a residential brothel, that didn't have any bearing on our investigation or how we treated the investigation. So it wasn't something that came up in conversation. I believe the interview you're referring to, you asked me prior to the search warrants, was the decision made we were a church? And so, okay.
Your testimony is that even if the Phoenix Goddess Temple is a church, the activities there were illegal. That be an accurate statement from you as a liaison?
That's correct.
Okay. And the decision that the Phoenix Goddess Temple does not deserve the full weight of the Arizona law around churches. When was that decision made? That we just simply wouldn't apply Arizona law
Objection, this states the law.
Sustained.
I would ask that
Sustained.
police not engage in speaking
Sustained.
objections.
Sustained. Next question, please, Ms. Elise.
My research regarding churches in the state of Arizona, it wasn't really state of Arizona, it was the city of Phoenix, was limited to, at the beginning of my investigation into the Phoenix Goddess Temple, I was trying to establish who was listed on the Corporation Commission paperwork related to members, the articles of incorporation, that kind of thing that typically is listed with the Corporation Commission. So I did go to the Corporation Commission's website, typed in Phoenix Goddess Temple, typed in your address, typed in different parameters to attempt to ascertain who on the official documents was in charge of the temple. And when I didn't find anything related to the Phoenix Goddess Temple, I only found something related to the School of One. It piqued my curiosity about whether or not churches actually register with the Corporation Commission. I personally have never been involved in an investigation like this involving a church. And so I just, off the top of my head, thinking of various churches in the valley, started typing in those names of those churches to figure out how they were organized and registered. And I just kept seeing them pop up one after another, the various churches, and who sat on the board, I believe, is listed, and membership, when they were established, that kind of thing, so that I could determine, is it normal or is it customary for a church to be registered with the Corporation Commission, and many of them, I believe, received 501c status, 501c3 status, and so that honestly was my entire research related to churches in the city of Phoenix.
From church to a nonprofit 501c3 status by joining with the Native American Church, receiving a charter. Do you recall seeing that happen anywhere in your investigation? The fact that the Phoenix Goddess Temple and Sedona Temple, School of Temple Arts were chartered and taken in under a 501c3 legal status with a nonprofit tax ID number that dates back decades. Did you come across that information during that 6-month investigation?
Honestly, I knew from talking with Detective Chance about her 2009 complaint that you had been in existence for some time. I didn't know how long or, the duration of it, but when I went and looked early on in 2011 and saw that there was no registration with the Corporation Commission, knowing that you had been in existence for such an extended period of time, I did not follow up with the Corporation Commission and look again, each month to see if you had been, listed as a 501c3 status. I am not.
So the fact that it wasn't there just is like a little bit of the investigation where you sort of expected a certain thing, you weren't aware of free church status, you weren't aware of our 501c3 status once you received it. That actually wasn't on the radar during the 6-month investigation.
It wasn't. It didn't have any bearing. Like I said, even if you were registered with the Corporation Commission and had 501c3 status, it didn't have any bearing on our investigation into illegal activity. I don't believe I've ever encountered one.
I keep coming back to, I don't know how to get past it. As a detective, when you decide to target someone that they are doing an illegal something, do you
So much of it depends on what type of crime we're looking at. I mean, if we're looking at criminal enterprise, certainly we spend an extremely large amount of time with that investigation, all facets of that investigation. So like I said, I spent a tremendous amount of time perusing your website. We spent time doing surveillance, watching the comings and goings of the individuals within the temple, interacting with people both inside the temple and having interactions with folks outside of the temple and, individuals, practitioners that were posting for sessions outside of the temple. So we do, looking at criminal enterprise cases, look at several different facets. This is why the investigation is a 6-month-long investigation. We're not spending an entire 6 months. We have other cases that we're working at the same time, but it takes that length of time in many cases because it's not so simple as going in, making one prostitution deal, affecting one arrest, or not even affecting an arrest in your situation, but making one prostitution deal. That's not enough to bring down an entire organization like an illegal enterprise case, as you just mentioned. We do have to involve ourselves in many different facets.
Altars to the mother, altars to the mother-father, all of the big chakra charts that were painted, like 5-foot tall chakra charts that were painted throughout the building. I think we had 14 of them. As you were seeing altars and the ladder of light symbols, as you were seeing these types of things, did you ever have pause that maybe you didn't understand the intention and motive of the people at the temple? Or were you just sure it was sex for money?
I forgive my ignorance, but I'm not sure specifically what you're referring to when you discuss altars. I don't know if that's rooms, if that's figurines.
Right.
I don't know specifically what an altar looks like. I can tell you, going into the temple, as I did on a couple different occasions, and I know I'll be speaking to that later, it was different than I've experienced going into massage parlors. The look of it was different. And
Did it feel different?
Honestly, I'm not much in touch with my energy, feelings. For me,
you had to do that and be a police officer, and I appreciate you for doing your job. You couldn't be too emotional.
I just, and maybe it's because I'm a police officer, but we're very much focused on, we have a responsibility, we're going in, we're doing a job, we're talking to the people we need to, and we're moving on because we have many other cases we're working. So it's, I didn't get in touch with the feeling part you're talking about.
Okay. So, based on what you just said, Detective, it would be maybe, you said something about you became an undercover agent and you got eventually comfortable with presenting another persona to do your undercover work.
Yes, that's correct.
And so, when you viewed the people at the Phoenix Goddess Temple, did you perceive them as being like false personas at work? Kind of like when you're undercover, you're not really you, the woman, you're actually playing the role. So did you sort of view the people at the Phoenix Goddess Temple as playing a role versus being sincere in that they were acting it out versus really being there as healers?
Honestly, I didn't give that any thought. I thought they were very pleasant. The individuals that we interacted, that I had the opportunity to interact with, they were very kind, they were very pleasant. But I didn't engage in any kind of conversation that would lead me to even pay that any attention as to whether or not they were being sincere about what they were doing. Because the time that I was in the temple, I I didn't know necessarily what they were doing. It was kind of earlier on in the process. There were a couple of undercover deals, but the people that I was interacting with, like Tamara Brousseau, I looked at her as a very kind individual. She was very friendly.
Right. Speaking of Tamara, I understand, if I'm not mistaken, correct me please, gentlemen of the prosecution, but I believe in the opening statement something about Tamara Brousseau said she was a prostitute. Was that mentioned in the opening?
Is there a question here?
I'm sorry, okay. Did Tamara Brousseau ever tell you that she was a prostitute?
She did tell me that.
Actually, withdraw. Objection withdrawn, Judge.
Okay. In an undercover capacity, while I was in there meeting with her about working within the temple, she indicated that she was a prostitute from the age of 16.
Yes. And did she also discuss, or did you become aware that her work as a prostitute ended with her legal work at the Bunny Ranch?
Objection. Calls for
Whoever discussed the Bunny Ranch with her
Objection. Calls for
prostitution is
hearsay.
legal.
But hold on, when there's an objection, please stop speaking. Mr. Leiter,
Calls for hearsay, Judge.
overruled. You may answer.
She never discussed working at the Bunny Ranch. She didn't discuss anything related to prostitution more than she began prostituting when she was 16, and she left it at that. We didn't get into any specifics beyond that.
Okay. And it would be your testimony now that she didn't say, I am a prostitute during the investigation?
No, she said that what she did was more difficult than prostitution when we discussed it.
Okay, thank you. Mindset's so important here. It just really is. Culpable mindset. So as you're gathering the evidence of money and sex, which is the main core, I'm sure, of the investigation, is to prove money and sex, is that the main objective in a prostitution investigation, is to find evidence of money and sex? Is that the primary?
It can be sex, it can be any sexual conduct, and it can be money, or it can be something, some other kind of a fear, an arrangement.
Okay.
But yes.
So you're primarily concerned with evidence of sex and evidence of money?
In most cases, it is.
Okay. And so, but the law does talk about knowingly, and culpable mindset in prostitution knowingly applies. So as you were doing the investigation, what sorts of notes were you taking about knowingly? Like, what were you thinking about the temple people doing prostitution knowingly? Did you feel that they were knowingly being prostitutes?
I didn't take any notes related to that. But yes, they knowingly were committing acts of prostitution. And I believe that based on the conversations that I monitored and the discussions I had with the undercover officers after the prostitution deals regarding the interactions inside the transformation chambers. So my belief was that they were knowingly engaging in these acts.
Is it possible that in their minds something else was happening? Is that possible?
That is possible.
Okay.
Under the statute, it doesn't require that they knew it was illegal. I think that might be what you're getting.
Well, I was trying to get to the knowingly, that they were knowingly prostitutes. I was just...
Okay.
But I know you're saying it's possible that they were knowingly thinking something else.
Anything's possible.
Okay, thank you, officer. I have lots more questions. Should I keep going, Your Honor, till 4:30? I thought someone said they had to leave early.
We're stopping at 4:15 today, so
Oh, thank you,
you have
Your
a few
Honor.
more minutes.
Thank you, okay. So under the 6-month undercover investigation, which then produced reports, police reports. After I read through the police reports, I didn't see mention of any of the altars, the chakra ladder of light, mentions of physical evidence that it might be a church or a temple, is it your testimony that even though that stuff was present, you didn't need to gather it as a detective because it was irrelevant? The evidence of sacred objects, the latter, I'm trying to get to how, when knowingly mindset is part of the job, how is it that none of the religious altars, the artifacts, the ladder of life, how did none of that make it into the police reports and summations? Because it really isn't there. How is it that every detective just didn't write that up, about the weird little symbols on the walls, the altars to the mother, the altars to sacred union? None of that was written up. Is that normal to not write all that stuff down as being present at the scene of the crime? Because the temple was a scene of a crime. So wouldn't they normally write down the presence of altars?
Honestly, we've never investigated, at least to my knowledge, a case similar to this. But it is not customary to, in police reports, make observations. Like, for instance, if he was in, an individual was in a massage parlor, it's not customary for him to discuss paintings on the wall, or some of them, I believe, have, that I've been in for search warrants, have Buddhas or other candles, and it's not customary for them to describe what the room looks like. So it was not out of the ordinary. When I saw the police reports, I can't speak to exactly why the individuals didn't include that. That would be a question I would ask you to ask them, if you have the opportunity to do so. But it's not customary to describe the surroundings unless you're putting in information related to people that you interacted with, or maybe conversations you had with other individuals, that kind of thing. But we don't typically describe artifacts or, like I said, wall hangings, paintings, that kind of thing. Unless, of course, it's a crime involving a theft and you're going in there looking for a artifact that may have been stolen or something to that effect.
I did ask the other detectives that you worked with about this, and they said, as you said it wasn't really relevant. So would you agree that it just isn't generally relevant, the art, etc.?
I would agree it's not relevant.
Okay, yeah. And then the detectives, but it is my opinion, if I was a detective, I would look at the physical objects looking for clues to mindset. Did you ever look for clues to the mindset of the people at the temple?
Looking for clues for the mindset.
Why they're doing it, how they're doing it, the motives for doing it, anything like that, mindset.
I wouldn't say motives, but certainly, there was discussion amongst myself and Detective Herman about why individuals were there, why they were doing different things. But I didn't have a tremendous amount of interaction with individuals while I was at the temple, other than Tamara Brusso. So all I can speak to is my interactions with her. And she told us about why she was there. So, we questioned it amongst ourselves, Detective Herman and I, wanting to know kind of what was going on as we're trying to figure out this case. But I just don't have anything to draw on because I didn't have interactions from other people to know why they were there.
Okay. So without the interactions with people, you still have the website, the school website, which had all these classes and courses around sacred sexuality, touch, energy, holy anointing, all that stuff. So, huge school website, ordination programs, classes, courses, all that stuff. Did that ever enter into your calculations around motive, intent, the why of this crime? Did you ever look at any of, because I understand you didn't talk to people. Did you ever look at the sum totality, the totality of circumstance? Did you ever, were you ever stricken by the totality of circumstance at how different this was than a massage parlor?
It was apparent from day one that this organization was very different than massage parlors in the way it was set up, the website, the dress. That was apparent to me from day one.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to get some information that I don't have, and it might help the jury. What is the motive of prostitution in your experience? I understand everybody has a different motive, perhaps, but is there an underlying motive? Is it just the need for money, would you say? Or I don't want to put words in your mouth. What do you think the underlying motive is for the crime of prostitution? Why would someone do it?
Well, there's a whole myriad of reasons. Many of them, it's financial based. So much of it depends on, are we talking about people that are working for a trafficker, or are we talking about people that are doing this on their own free will?
Let's talk about the free will, folks.
Okay.
Thank you.
So for individuals that are doing it on their own free will that I've encountered, and I ask them, because that's a question I ask them, because as part of my job, I want to get them resources and help to get them out of this life if they've expressed desire to get out of this life, which pretty sure just about every person I've ever encountered has expressed desire to get out of this life of prostitution. So when I'm speaking with those individuals, I ask them, why are you doing this? And it's financial based. You know, I have college tuition to pay. I have dental bills to pay. And again, I'm talking about people that are not trafficking victims, that are not working for pimps. They've got bills to pay. They don't have an education. They can't support themselves and their children on a minimum wage job. You know, they just got evicted from their house. Their car broke down. A lot of the people that we encounter are in the life of prostitution for a short time to cover a financial need.
Okay.
Again, this is referring to those individuals that are not trafficked.
Thank you for that. That was great distinctions.
All right, Ms. Elise, we'll go ahead and take the evening recess.
Evening break. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you.
next week is Thanksgiving. So we will not have court, obviously, on Thursday or Friday of next week. After speaking with the attorneys earlier today, and Ms. Elise, we have decided not to have trial on Wednesday either. So next week, you will be here Monday and Tuesday only, all right? So you do not need to be here on Wednesday. So on Monday, please return at 10:30. We will start promptly at that time. Please remember the admonition. Are there any questions? All right, we'll see you on Monday. Thank you. Have a nice weekend. All right, anything else before we adjourn? All right, we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.